Hello there, and welcome to this episode of Force Ghost Conversations. This is your host, Anthony King, and this week I am joined by Greg Cass, aka EyeOnCanon, to discuss the film The Creator. If you're a fan of the podcast and would like to consider pledging your support, there will be a link in the episode description for you to check out the various tiers offered. Also, please be sure to check out our TeePublic store to buy some Force Ghost Conversations merchandise. And without further ado, it is time to gather around the campfire for some Force Ghost Conversations. All right, folks, we have another fabulous installment of Force Ghost Conversations for you here today. I'm so thrilled to have back Greg Cass, aka EyeOnCanon, from the Long Take Review podcast and many other places on the internet. Just wonderful, wonderful person all around to chat about this original sci-fi story from 2023 called The Creator. And we're dousing into the Lucasfilm adjacent portion of this podcast here for this episode and for the next couple of weeks here, frankly, because we'll be talking about Rebel Moon in the next couple of weeks as well. So it's always fun, especially when there's not a Star Wars project going around, that we can kind of touch into these areas of the galaxy that are certainly inspired by Star Wars, of course. And Gareth Edwards, no stranger, the director of The Creator, directed Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and has definitely been a part of the Lucasfilm family for quite some time now. So really glad to dive deep into this film. We go into a lot of cool places about AI and just the story of the film, and Greg has some amazing stories about his experience with this film to begin with. So just really great to have that. To have him bring his perspective to this show as well. But before we get into that main topic discussion here, I did want to touch upon some news in the Star Wars Lucasfilm galaxy that has taken place over the past week. And frankly, to start, I did want to note that this episode has been released in coordination with Star Wars Podcast Day. It is the anniversary of Jedi Talk, which was the very first Star Wars podcast, which premiered on February 7th, 1999. So over 25 years now. That would be, it's just an incredible achievement that we have this wonderful world that we're in right now, and that we can chat about Star Wars. And there's so much in this galaxy to talk about, and even the adjacent stuff too, which is like the disciples of Star Wars in many ways. We'll get into that in this conversation here as well. So thrilled to be a part of Star Wars Podcast Day. I think it's like the third or fourth time that we've done it at this point, which is pretty spectacular. So really thrilled to be a part of that. And I hope you check out many of the other podcasts that are participating in this. Well, maybe discover something brand new that is, a new podcast to add to your feeds and to keep in the connection to the Star Wars and galaxy of it all. We'll move on to our next thing, and just breaking some news to you folks, perhaps here. Come July, there's a big film coming out called Jurassic World Rebirth. There was a new trailer that came out for this story, also by director Gareth Edwards. So very timely in terms of the release of this episode. We did not plan that to go this way, but it just kind of worked out. So um, the trailer is out now. Go check it out. Maybe we'll talk about it on an upcoming episode if I choose to do so. But the news that I want to break to you all is that we're definitely going to be doing some Jurassic Park discussions come the summer season. Right, this is a big time release, and ILM's involved with it. There's a lot of Spielberg and Lucas, so the Lucasfilm of it all is certainly applicable, in my opinion, to be worthy of chatting about. So we'll be doing some deep dive discussions into the Jurassic Park franchise when it gets closer to July, so over the summer season. So you can be on the lookout for that. So that's why when you hear me say like, oh, there's a Jurassic Park thing here and there, that's why you shouldn't be surprised about it one way or the other. And finally, there is a new Star Wars novel that was announced. It was called Star Wars Sanctuary, a Bad Batch novel, written by Lamar Giles. Lamar Giles. I hope I got that right. I'm going with Lamar Giles at this point. If you go on StarWars.com right now or in the various social media platforms, you can see the book's cover with art by Marie Bergeron. And the story, as told by from the synopsis on StarWars.com, says that this Star Wars Sanctuary is set during the events of Season 2 of the Disney Plus series of The Bad Batch, of course, which centers on Hunter, Wrecker, Tech, and Omega as they work with treasure hunter Fee Genoa on a plan to help rebuild their island refuge after the devastating tsunami seen in the episode Pabu. This is right up my alley, folks. More Bad Batch content is always a good thing, especially more tech content, right? Holy cow, we're getting another story just before that horrific, cataclysmic season 2 finale of the Bad Batch. And I can't wait for this story to come out. I guess I'm sure we'll get some more details closer to Celebration. I think it's supposed to come out around August, so be on the lookout for more details as they come out. We'll definitely report on it, so don't worry about that. With that, folks, that is all the news that I had for this week in the Star Wars and Lucasfilm adjacent galaxy. So, without further ado, let's get on to our conversation with Greg Cass about the creator. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations, everyone. This is one of those episodes where we kind of do a divergent take on the Star Wars and Lucasfilm of it all, because this is where we talk about things that I would consider to be Lucasfilm adjacent, things that are inspired by Star Wars, the art of making Star Wars, the act of Star Wars itself, Star Wars in the zeitgeist. And this has been one that I've been dying to talk about. We talk about the whiteboard all the time of ideas here on the podcast, and the creator, the film that we're talking about today from 2023 by director Gareth Edwards, has been on this list since I saw the movie. So I'm so thrilled to have a conversation about it today. And it's a very timely one, too, at that. We'll get that a little bit here. But I want to bring in our guest for today's episode. Of course, you know him from EyeOnCanon on the internet and the Long Take Review podcast, and just general great guy that is doing all that he can to watch all these Academy Award nominated pictures. Greg Cass, welcome back to Force Ghost Conversations. And how are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me back on. It's always a pleasure, and I love the when your message arrives with like the leading question. I'm like, oh, this is going somewhere good. But this is a great movie to talk about, and yeah, I couldn't believe our timing the way it ended up today. And a real pleasure to revisit this film because I had seen it and I hadn't gone back to it, so this was my first time, and it's a very interesting story, which I will slowly unveil about my experience with this movie. So,
Oh, I can't wait to dive into it here. And like you said, this is a great film to rewatch given current events in the world, but also the fact that at the time that we're recording this, a new trailer just came out today for the upcoming Jurassic World Rebirth film, which you can argue because of the kind of success of this movie, that's what got Gareth Edwards the job for that film. So the trailer is out. Go watch it on whatever platform you can find the trailer these days. YouTube probably is your most easy source to find something like that. And I'll spoil my thoughts on it. I thought it was really great. I'm excited to see it.
yeah, I mean, where I sat with this franchise is I felt pretty let down by Dominion, and it
Oh,
just felt
really? I love
like,
Dominion.
oh, well, I was so excited for everybody to come back and for all of it, and then it just felt like such a mishmash that it didn't.
Hmm.
And like the potential of like, oh, the dinosaurs are loose in the world, but let's skip forward to when we've captured a bunch and put them in a park and try to
We'll
survive in the
create a new
park.
sanctuary. Yeah.
Yeah. So I just, it didn't quite work for me. So when they announced that Gareth Edwards was signed on to direct, I was like, all right, you got me back. I'll be there. I'm right back in it. And very excited. I agree. The trailer was a lot of fun. And it's funny because I was thinking how there's a line in the trailer. Hopefully people stopped and listened to it where it's like, there's another island. That's the research facility for the original island. And I was like, man, I should be rolling my eyes, but I'm not. I'm like totally stoked. I'm like,
You're like,
yes,
give it
tell
to
me
me.
all
Why
about this
not?
other island. Yeah, yeah. It's such a great premise for a franchise that I can't wait. So it should be
Now,
really
here's
good.
the question is, I don't know exactly. I mean, I can't wait to dive deeper into the Jurassic Park films, but not, just more the sequels, I will say, because is it the same island from the Lost World? Like that was kind of where my
Hmm.
brain was going, like the copycat Isla Nublar they made. Uh, did you kind of brain think about that as a second option?
I I was thinking of that, and then there is the shot that looks like the original visitor center, kind of
Yeah,
brand new. So that confused me. Are we getting some flashbacks? And I was going to throw it to you with the question of like, do we know if this is after Dominion or are
I
they
think
kind of
so. It
being
should be
vague?
after Dominion. Like I would
Okay.
think that's the case.
Yeah, I think it would get confusing to jump around in that timeline. So,
Yeah,
um,
straight ahead.
yeah,
Don't go
yeah.
backwards.
But I mean, just even like activating the parts of my brain that haven't thought about Lost World and the first Jurassic Park in so long is really exciting. So I can't wait
Mhm.
to dive back in. And I was listening to a couple movie podcasts where they were saying like, is this automatically the top grossing film of the year? I mean, there's a
It
lot of
could.
Marvel coming out this year. We also
A
got a
lot.
very cool Fantastic Four trailer
That was awesome.
2 days ago. So could be, but Jurassic Park is very reliable in terms of box office. So it could be.
Dominion, despite bad reviews, still made $1 billion.
Yeah. And there's
All
also
3 that didn't Fallen Kingdom
I
also
think so.
make $1 billion, and
Yeah,
certainly World did.
definitely. There's also some like it's a movie about some man who's super that's coming out this year, something like that. I don't know if you're familiar
Smack
with it.
dab in between it. All these, July is gonna be a hotbed month for
Yeah.
films, and, which one's gonna be the failure, right? I think that'll be the interesting thing for us box office nerds is like, ooh, who takes the hit? Because all of them
Yeah.
theoretically can't be successful.
Right. There's just not enough time, not enough screen, so we'll have to
Especially
see.
when they're right after each other, someone's gonna take the hit. So,
Yeah.
honestly, the real winner is gonna be How to Train Your Dragon for coming out in early June, and then
That's
that'll have the most screen time before the real slog of the summer season hits.
I think that's right. And Mission Impossible, which got
Oh my gosh,
ruined
that's
by
coming out.
yeah, well, it played it wrong last summer and was too close to Oppenheimer, so it lost all the
Yeah,
premium screens. So
yeah.
they backed it up to May. They were like, "We'll just try to get in on that early." I think it's Memorial Day, so
How could
yeah.
I forget that that amazing film is coming out? Oh my gosh, what in the world, folks? I mean, come on. And
Yeah,
Dogman just
good
came out
summer.
this past weekend, so that'll theoretically be in the box office until until June as well.
Yeah.
Another good one. Go take the kids if you haven't seen that one. I really liked it a lot. That was my Brutalist palate cleanser. I walked right out of the Brutalist and saw, oh, Dogman just started, and walked right in.
I love that double feature idea. Yeah. No, I took my son to see Dogman. We had a great time.
That was a
And
good one.
fun
Yeah.
fun animation style, like the things he doesn't care about. He's just excited because he read the books. But
Yeah, okay.
I was like,
He's
yeah,
an OG Dogman fan. He was
yeah.
bringing you
Well,
along.
this is the year of his movies because all these things he's loved for a few years. So Dogman, Minecraft in
Oh,
April,
yep,
which is
target audience. Yep.
absolutely, and then you mentioned How to Train Your Dragon, which he also loves. So it's like he's just like, Dad, they're making movies out of everything I love. I'm like, that's what it's like to be
That's
10. Like,
that's it. That's it. And then I hope well, this technically, well, theoretically, if we're skipping ahead and talking about Rebirth, could that
yeah,
theoretically be his first Jurassic Park film?
it
Are you
could
willing to
be.
take that risk as a dad to
That's a
see
good
what
question.
happens? Or you
I well,
preview
I
it first and then say if it's good, like we can take him.
I've thought really carefully about the first Jurassic Park because I love that original
Hmm.
Jurassic Park movie, and I saw it in the theater that original summer, and then I would have been 10. So I've kind of been waiting, thinking when he's 10, it's kind of that good, kind of safe, scary, like a little
Yeah.
blood, a little tension, but nothing overwhelming. Um, so I might go that route. I might start him there, and if he really loves it, and I would preview it. I'm going opening night to Rebirth, so
That's right.
I'll go see it, and then
Your
if I
AMC
need to go the next
Subs is
day,
already picked out for that week.
yeah, totally, yeah, easily do the like 3 screenings that Friday morning if I have
Oh, nice, nice.
to.
Wow. And you're just already on the directory, right? The path from Dogman to Rebirth to then showing the Brutalist to your son. It's
Oh,
a
perfect.
straight line straight to it.
He'll be a
uh,
brutalist boy,
it'll be
absolutely.
well. It was a fantastic film, so I hope everyone watching gets a chance to go see it. It's a very much a love letter to Pennsylvania and all these areas I grew up seeing as a kid. Um, so definitely go check it out. Really wonderful movie, and Adrian Brody is spectacular in it. Also, Felicity
Mm,
Jones, another Star Wars connection, and
that's true.
a Rogue One connection. Gareth Edwards. It all comes back. It circles back,
Yeah.
everybody. So
There's the pro.
with that, let's get back into our conversation here about 2023's The Creator. And folks, if you haven't watched this sci-fi awesome space opera film yet, well, go watch it. It's on Prime right now. It's probably going to be on other streaming platforms throughout its lifetime. So just kind of search it on Google and it'll show you where it's probably available. Or you could purchase the 4K and have it forever because I think it's a pretty good movie.
Mhm.
So you've been warned. This is a full spoiler conversation. And Greg, let's start with our discussion here. That at the point of recording this film came out, I believe, in August, September of 2023, towards that late summer end. So the movie's over a year and a half old at this point. So when you saw it for the first time, what were your impressions?
All right, Anthony, this is like the strangest answer to that question possible.
Oh, lay it
So,
on me. This is the best answer ever already.
so I had such a rocky road to seeing this movie. So, actually, on Long Take Review, my movie podcast, I hadn't heard about this movie, and then we did like a fall preview episode, and Jen Sobchak Bankard, my co-host, said,
Mhm.
"Oh, there's a Gareth Edwards movie coming out. It's original sci-fi, and she talked a little bit about what she knew, and it
Yeah.
sounded amazing." She then got to go the next week to a preview screening where the effects weren't even finished yet, so
Mm.
there would be placeholders, and
Whoa.
she wasn't allowed to talk about it. But she thinks Gareth Ever was there in the back. This is what you get when you live in LA, right? You get
What
that
are we
real.
doing? We gotta be in the heat of it all.
But when you go to one of those things, you sign a pretty strict non-disclosure, and so she was
Yeah.
very clear. She's like, I can tell you I have seen it, but I cannot tell you anything else about it. So I was really
Oh,
anticipating it,
wow.
even without her giving kind of a verdict either way. So as I'm sure happens down near you, we've seen it happen a few times lately for Star Wars TV shows where they do like a special preview screening.
Mhm, mhm.
So I got an email that said special preview the creator. And I was like,
Okay.
oh my God, like I'm in. And I signed up right away for 2 passes. I called my friend Ben, well, texted him, and he's the world's biggest Rogue One fan. He would put that as like his top Star Wars movie. I was like, save this Thursday night or whatever it was. Like, we're going
Mhm,
downtown. I got
mhm.
special preview passes. We're going to see the creator like 2 months before it comes out. And so we go to this special event, and those types of things, they overbook, so you get there really early and try to
Oh,
reserve a
yeah.
seat and all that. It's like a huge game. So we get inside, and there's a big slide up. We make it in. We get 2 seats. They give us posters. They give us lanyards. They give us placards. All this like swag. And there's a big thing up that's like there's going to be a Q&A with the director. Text your questions here. And he wasn't in
Whoa.
Boston, but it was live streamed.
Live streamed, okay.
So I texted in a question, and then I'm like, wow, they must be doing that after the movie. Like, great, I'll ask like something about the movie. And so then the evening starts, and it's the Q&A. And I'm like, wait,
Oh, that's
why is
out
it
of
the
order.
Q&A? That's bizarre. Like, we're gonna get a Q&A for like an hour before the film, which happens. But and then it turns out, and so here's where the story finally gets interesting, probably to your bored listeners. Turns out special preview actually didn't mean they were showing us the movie. This was like essentially a press event. And literally everybody in the theater, not just me, thought we were about to see the creator. And then it
No.
slowly gets revealed that there will be a Q&A, and they will play 3 scenes from the film. And that we all just waited in a massive line, and Ben and I both traveled downtown. We don't live near downtown to this theater. And so the first scene
Wow.
starts playing, and it's actually the opening beach scene kind of after the
Mhm.
newsreel. And Ben turns to me, he's like, dude, I don't want to see this. Like, I don't want to see 3 scenes. I want to
I
wait
don't
and
wanna
see
be
the movie.
spoiled out of the context,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so he was like, we should just go. And I was like, I kind of like, I did all
You
this.
spent
I
all this
want to
time coming
stay.
out here, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
So
a
I
whole
stayed.
effort.
And he just left, and like we agreed, like he wanted to go, I wanted to stay, so we just did it. And so essentially, I left that night like still interested in the movie, but pretty angry.
I
And
would be upset too.
by the time I got out to the hallway, there were some people really dressing down the poor marketing consultant who had nothing to do with the decision making, but was the only target
Just the voice
for
of
that
yeah.
anger. And so the poor young woman was like, "We never said it was the movie. We're sorry, you misunderstood. We just and it really just felt like, let's take all the people who are most excited for this movie and make them really angry."
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
uh,
Went out of their way, planned their whole day around this, made extra time
yeah,
available to make sure they got a seat for this, and then Let's
And
kind of take the rug out from underneath them.
there was a kid in line with us who had driven up from Connecticut. I'm like, he
Oh,
drove like
wow.
2 hours to come see this. And
Wow.
so I left that night. Well, like I saved my poster and all my swag, but I'm like, I'm pretty angry at you to put us through this. I should also say, even though I was angry, I did get a question through to Gareth Edwards, which
Oh.
was like, I texted like, what films would be a good companion for this in terms of like the
Hmm.
mood and so on. And
Okay.
I think his main answer was Blade Runner, which is kind of
I
obvious,
mean,
but
that's
undeniable.
what
And
sci-fi
me,
film isn't a
yeah, that's true.
companion to.
That's true. So then a month and a half later, I got opening night tickets. I treated Ben since I'd ruined his other
That
night
was nice
for
of
it.
you.
And then we get to the theater, and Ben's like, "Well, you treated me. Let me grab you an adult beverage, and so we can have a beer each and sit and
Mhm.
watch the movie." And the taps in the bar were down, so I couldn't. And so it was like pointing at a can from like 10 feet away. I'm like, "I'll take
Sure.
that can." And so I got to the movie, through pre-show, Maria Menounos, all that. And all of a sudden, I look at the can, and the can was extremely high alcohol by volume. And I hadn't realized because I was far away. So I essentially started this movie very tipsy. And I'm not a drinker. I'm not somebody who does this a lot. So I was like, and I don't remember much. So I remember the opening scene, and then
Don't
I kind of
remember.
like got a little hazy in the middle. And all I remember from that night is at some point
Oh,
I
man.
turned around and started looking at all the people in the theater watching the movie. And I was just going like, wow, man, we're doing it. Like, this is the dream. Like, we're all together, and like, this is cinema, man. Like, we're doing it. It's so wonderful. And it was because of this very high alcohol beer. But I did. I mean, it's a long movie, so I eventually was totally
Eventually
fine and
came to your senses. Yeah.
caught in and could fill in enough of what had happened. So all that is to say, when it came out, I had a really weird set of experiences, but I was positive. I would say I was like at
Hey.
the B plus range. I didn't necessarily think this was like the greatest thing I'd ever seen,
Mhm.
but there are some markers in it that are just stunning, and particularly visuals, and then a lot of
Yeah.
the inventive world building, even in my elevated state, broke through. And wow, that robot is, so it really did strike me as something special. And then, again, we alluded to this project I do for the Oscars, and when it got nominated for Best Visual Effects, it
Mhm.
then was in a little bit of that conversation, and I thought it was such a wonderful kind of recognition
Yeah.
of what it achieved for the level of movie it was. And yeah, so it was very strange, but I was overall positive, and I think I was frustrated by how most critics and a lot of people, it did okay, as I recall. I don't think it broke any records or
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
wowed at the box office. And
It
I
kind of
think
evened
critics
out,
were kind of
you know?
lukewarm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you must have had a more normal trip to this movie.
I will say yours takes the cake. Like I can't follow that. Mine was a standard, man. I got my ticket. I went to the theater. I watched it. I had my popcorn, and then I left. And then it was a good time. Like yours, man. That is
So
such an
strange.
interesting scenario where you're at this press event, basically, and
Yeah.
they kind of cloak and daggered the situation into being like, "Oh, we'll just show 3 scenes out of context. Hope you like them." Come back
Mm.
2 months and see the finished product here, uh, for an audience that is willing to see it, right? They came
Yeah.
out of their way. This is the group that would go out and say to their friends, "Hey, I did this. It's a cool thing. Here's the swag I got. I loved the movie. Like, I felt so special being a part of this thing. Go check it out yourself. I think it was worth your time." Like, that's the intent of what something like that should do. So it's really interesting marketing ploy to say, "Ah, we're
Mm.
not gonna fully do that yet, but we won't really reveal that until push comes to shove, and we'll see how it
Yeah.
goes." Like, it probably didn't impact the overall box office too much in hindsight, but it definitely could have earned it a few more bucks at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, my question then becomes like, was it not finished? Sometimes with these blockbusters, they're
Yeah. Yeah.
they're
Was it
tinkering
fully
up
not
until the last
100%
second.
of a product? Yeah.
And a lot of times with movie critics, you hear if they don't do preview screenings, it's because they think it's a stinker, right? And
Yeah.
I don't think the studio
Yeah, they
necessarily
wait till the
thought
last minute
that.
to show that
Yeah,
that
yeah, and then they barely leak it out before it. So I don't think it was necessarily that second one. I think if either
Mhm.
of those scenarios were true, it's probably that it wasn't quite done.
It
But
must not, yeah, it must not, because they were pretty confident in, like, the marketing of this film and doing
yeah,
the full press tour and release and doing the screenings, like, a week plus in advance, which is usually a sign of, like, we believe in this product to a large degree. We're not trying to sweep it under the rug and have the review embargo the second before the 7 o'clock showings on that Thursday go
yeah,
go live, right? Um, that's interesting too that you shared the experiences of Jen, your co-host on the long take review. I'd be curious to hear what now that she can talk about it. I imagine what she would say about seeing what she saw. Like what I'm interested, like what wasn't finished yet, what was kind of still being worked on. I'd be curious to know like what that cut of the film looked like. But you may have insights now as you came to a bit more. What did Ben think? Because you saw the scenes out of context. How did knowing that influence your
yeah.
viewing? But for Ben not knowing a thing, how did he come out of it on the other side? Assuming that he also too remembers and could coherently speak
I think
about how he liked it.
I think after the fact, he said, like, "I saw you pick what I knew was a strong beer, and I did not pick
Oh,
that."
he didn't imbibe the same thing.
No, he had picked his own can, across yeah, the 3 scenes, as I recall, they showed us the opening beach kind of, scenario up through kind of, the hero revealing to, sorry, I'm already forgetting, Joshua revealing to
Yes.
Maya or John David Washington revealing to Gemma Chan, that he was the undercover agent, kind of right up
Mhm.
to that smash to credits, which was
Wow, they revealed a
exciting.
lot. That's a big
Yeah,
reveal.
yeah, definitely, and I think it was about halfway through that scene, Ben was like, "I gotta go, like, I don't wanna know this, I wanna
Oh, he
go
saw a
in to
little bit of
enjoy it."
that too. He didn't
A
even like
little,
say, "I'm out of here" before it even rolls.
no, and I think
Oh
he was trying to
man.
be a good friend and left. And then they showed us part of the confrontation in, I believe when they meet, the weapon, or, the young girl, Alfie,
Alfie.
and,
Yes.
that inside that facility, which Gareth talked a lot about how that was a real facility, and they kinda just paid the scientists that worked there to be extras, which is
Get out
super
of here
cool.
or stay in. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Um, and then, they showed the bridge sequence with the running bombs, and so
Whoa.
3 killer sequences
Key
from
sequences
across the
too.
whole movie, and, there were, I would say, I would add the space, station to that as, like, the big action set pieces, but, like,
Yeah.
they showed us a lot. Ben, huge Gareth Edwards fan, huge Rogue One fan, as I said. And I recall him really liking it. I think we both felt it was really messy.
Mhm.
Ben had done, there was a set of podcasts put out by The Ringer that was like a retrospective on Vietnam movies. And he had
Mm.
kind of participated, watched along. So he'd just watched Platoon and,
Oh, so he was in that mindset. Yeah.
Apocalypse Now and all of that. So I think that really filtered his appreciation of this film, and
Mm.
some critics at the time noted there were some problematic aspects of kind of just subbing in robots for Asian culture, like, kind of without
Sure,
really being
sure.
sensitive to it.
I think that's
Um,
fair. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, and so then he was kind of reading it through that filter, but really liked it for that. I think, kind of ended up loving the visuals more than the story, which I would probably
Mhm.
put myself at the end of the first screening.
Okay, okay.
But but both were positive, and I think, in terms of the relationship between this and Rogue One, I think you see a lot of shared DNA, and if you like one, I think you're guaranteed to like the other. So
I
to
think
your
so too.
listener that heard your spoiler warning and was like, "Nah, I'll just listen," like, really check this out because especially if you like Rogue One as your kind of
Yeah.
boots on the ground Star Wars.
And for an original Star Wars, not an original Star Wars, but original science fiction story in this modern time where we don't really get a whole lot of original stories in the cinema to begin with nowadays, especially
No,
big budget
yeah.
things. To get a modest budget of $100 million plus for this movie is in today's day and age, it's not connected to like a Sonic the Hedgehog or a superhero or Dogman. Like it's unheard of. Like you know
Yeah.
things are trying to start new franchises, and the way that this movie kind of ends doesn't really beg a sequel at all. In fact, I would
Mhm.
be upset if there was a sequel because it would undermine a lot of the story of this
Yeah,
movie. It
yeah.
doesn't make sense where it could go from here in a sequel. So it's really a one and done story, which I think people have been clamoring for, which is a surprise why it didn't perhaps do much better. But I think people say online, "I want this," and then don't actually support it when they
Right,
actually get
exactly right.
it. They only go out to the movie theater when it is a big Jurassic World, Fantastic Four, Mission Impossible kind of. It's a reliable. I'm probably gonna have a good time experience with this, and I'm not gonna take the risk on spending $20 for a movie ticket and 3 to 4 hours of my time because of previews and driving to there and driving home afterwards. Right, the commitment of time too. They're like, if I'm going to do that, I want a little bit more less risk for the reward that I'm going to get. But to the people at home, now that it's available in many forms and platforms, this is a great
Yeah.
opportunity to check it out and watch it at your own pace because I think it has a lot to say about things that are important to this time, and it's a good, visually stunning film, and we'll get to that in a bit here in a second. Um, but now that you rewatched it for this sequence, or for this conversation, I should say. So now that you watched it with fully a fresh set of eyes, I I think
And
you watched it in the
totally
morning
sober.
too. So I
Yep,
think
yep.
you might have just had some coffee, some caffeine running through you, and some breakfast. So how did your feelings maybe change, or just approach it differently, or your thoughts? How did you feel after the second viewing, or maybe technically your second and a half viewing, unless you
Yeah,
watched it
who even knows? The
for
math
in
is all
rewatch
off.
for the Oscars last year. I don't know. Maybe you caught a glimpse of it later, but
That's a good
this is the
question.
first like really you sat down and devoted time to it.
Yeah, and what I've been trying to do as a viewer lately, as I'm sure everybody struggles with, is I've been really trying to single screen it and throw my phone
Hmm.
far away
Hmm.
from me so I don't pick anything up and
Don't
really kind of
distract
lock
yourself.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it certainly had my full attention, and I really enjoyed it on the rewatch. I would still say that, and I know this is part of our conversation later. I'm not sure what it's trying to say at all times,
Uh huh.
and especially because it's dealing with AI, we kind of demand it say something profound, and yet I think it feels to me like Gareth was more interested in like, I've got these cool visuals in mind. I got a neat story I want to tell, kind
Hmm.
of a wolf and cub story.
I think yeah.
And yeah,
How can I tie
and
that to a
that's what he
modern
went with.
take?
Yeah, yeah. And so like I'm gonna kind of have fun and do some really cool influenced sequences, and just maybe not be concerned with a social message or a political
Hmm.
message. And
Hmm.
I also think there's room in cinema for that, right? We were talking before we started recording about all the very heavy documentaries we've been watching lately,
Yeah.
and it's like
Yeah.
there's space for that, but there's also space for like let's just have fun and not
Turn your brain
necessarily
off and
worry
enjoy.
about
Yeah.
saying yeah, and there's enough here to certainly keep you chewing for a little while. It's a great like have a go see it with a friend and then have a good conversation after as we're
Hmm.
modeling here
Hmm.
because it's fun to talk about and there's some great ideas. But I would say I purposely said my last viewing I was like BB plus because I would say I was A minus. Like a few
Hmm.
things
Hmm.
I still found a little confusing, but I had a great time. And I just want to shout out in this viewing, Allison Janney stood out. I'm like,
She
man,
did. Yeah.
Allison Janney as a like, badass general is just awesome. Like great idea. Like CJ Craig gone militant.
Yeah.
Totally here for it in the next administration.
Agree. It's so funny that that was also amusing that I had as well because my wife has been rewatching The West Wing. I think very spurred on by recent world events. I think she needed some
Sure.
stability of democracy in this world.
Competency.
So yes, exactly. That's a great way to put it. So just seeing her in this kind of militant situation where she's driving kind of the opposite side forward, right? I think it's the
Mm,
Star Wars of it all, where we see where George is like the Empire was us,
yeah.
right? Right, and how he describes it nowadays. I know, like George has been very changing of his story about what Star Wars is
Mm.
about over the years, but the most recent one that he shared with James Cameron a few years back was very much inspired by Vietnam. The rebels are the Viet Cong and the NVA armies fighting against the Empire, the United States, and fighting for their own freedom and their own self governance, whatever that may be. Um, so just it's interesting to see her in this role, and I also think that her confidant too, Ralph Ineson's General
Mm.
Andrews, was also another standout for me, again a person that's also in the zeitgeist now, being Galactus in the upcoming Fantastic
Oh,
Four
yeah.
film. So he's just
Yeah.
kind of all these people are all over the place. So really, the goal is to get Allison Janney into a Star Wars, a Jurassic World, or a Marvel
Mm.
Cinematic Universe film. I think we're starting to get the drum going for that, folks.
Yeah, she'd be great.
She would be.
Yeah, well, like, my wife and I tried The Diplomat, and we were like, I don't know," and
Hmm.
then we were
Hmm.
watching the Golden Globes, and Allison Janney was nominated for we were like, "What? Allison Janney's on the we gotta go back and get that on," and now Bradley Whitford's
And
showing
I
up.
was about to say
Yeah.
if you hadn't heard, Bradley Whitford, yeah, is now
Yeah.
in the story as the first husband. Is that what they would call the
Oh,
gentleman?
must
First
be.
gentleman.
First
Yes.
Gentleman? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, as Allison Janney is president in that story. So yeah, go check it out, folks. Keep the Allison Janney train going.
Yeah. Well, and I was gonna say for Ralph Ineson, I had recently, in preparation for Nosferatu, watched The Witch, Robert Eggers'
Oh my gosh,
earlier
I
movie,
forgot. He's also in
and
Nosferatu and The Witch.
yeah,
Oh,
that's
brilliant.
right. Yeah, yeah. And so it was funny because he's so different in the kind of glasses and military uniform. I'm
Yeah.
like, who is this
It's almost
guy? Like,
unrecognizable. You're
why do
right.
I know him? So, so it was really when it clicked, I was like, oh,
And I bet
very
he'll be
cool, very cool.
unrecognizable as Galactus too, even though we've only
Yeah.
seen the back of his head. I can't imagine that he's actually there. Maybe they put his face digitally augmented
Well,
onto it, but he's
now
probably
I'm
just the
thinking of
voice.
Modoc, and I don't want that. I don't want
I don't I
that
don't
again.
I don't think anybody wants that. I don't think anybody wants that. I was a MODOK defender of the time, and slowly I've just lost my will to fight that battle. It's like, okay,
Uh,
it happened. We'll move on.
yep.
And speaking of moving on, let's talk about how this movie is kind of inspired by recent experiences that Gareth Edwards has had. Um, but we'll talk about that, I guess, just a little bit here. But overall, I just want to say, like, the reason that we're having this conversation on a Star Wars podcast is because I would dub this film as like a Lucasfilm adjacent thing, which, in my
Mm.
opinion, means that it was inspired by Star Wars. And I think because of Garrett's connection to that, that's probably how we can get to that in a little bit here. But overall, just how do you think this movie was or is inspired by Star Wars and the Star Wars saga itself?
When I look at the DNA of this, I see a lot well, Blade Runner, I was gonna do a 50-50, but I guess it's gotta be thirds. You gotta put Blade Runner in because of the replicants and in this case
Sure.
the
Very, very
you
much
know
on brand.
exactly right. And then I was struck by the opening. There's a lot of Terminator DNA here as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
We're just gonna blow up Los Angeles. It's because they get the movie screenings early. And
They get to
but
see
then the
alternate cuts. It's terrible. We gotta have these out for the world's consumption.
And then the third piece, I would say, has to be Star Wars, and it reminded me that when Gareth was doing the press tour for Rogue One, this
Mhm.
is that moment when George had kind of stepped away, but had been kind of present on the Force Awakens red carpets and stuff. He was
Yeah.
he was still kind of
Oh, yeah.
around,
Little
and then
grump
he
walking around.
yeah, and then he's like, "Okay, I'm good," and took more of a backseat. But Gareth would say on the press tour that he got a call from George Lucas, and he was always a little coy. I never heard him fully explain what George said. He
Mhm.
tended to say, "I'll never forget for the rest of my life," and so what I always assumed is that George was essentially saying like, "Yeah, this is the kind of thing I imagined we could do eventually, or kind of fits with,
Mhm. Mhm.
George always famously says he never got to see A New Hope, right? He never got to see Star Wars in the theater without thinking of all the background of it. So I always
Sure.
wondered if Rogue One was his A New Hope. But
Hmm.
what's most striking to me is that Star Wars pioneered the used universe world
Yeah.
building.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most present element here. And this film gets to be in our world instead of a fantasy world. But the way in which you get a sense of deep time as you're watching pretty much any scene here, the confrontation in the temple is at once evoking ancient Buddhist temples
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Vietnam films and the future. And there's just this sense that this whole world has been lived in and developed for so
Yeah.
long. And I don't think you get that without Star Wars. I don't think we would have ever really gotten that exact kind of used futuristic
Mhm. Mhm.
world. And so that's what comes to mind first.
Yeah, yeah, I am gonna yes and everything you said there. I think that's spot on entirely here, especially where I was trying to think like where could this conversation go with this type of question, right?
Mm,
To yes and that, I think that um, it's, I don't exactly know the etymology of who said this. I'm gonna just say for the sake of just moving on with the conversation here that it was Favreau and Filoni when talking about the Mandalorian and how they arrived at it, where they in conversations they had with George, they were like what should you watch in order to create Star Wars? And George was like, don't watch, or John Favreau, one of them was like, don't watch Star Wars to then be inspired
mm,
to make Star Wars. Watch the things that inspired Star Wars and then create your own Star Wars based off of that. Because that's how George created Star Wars. So watch things like Seven Samurai, The Searchers, right? Just all these World War II films and be inspired by that and then create your own thing and then somehow fit it within the grander universe. And to me, this is like taking that and then to the next level, which is adding Star
mm.
Wars into that and then creating something that's not Star Wars in that same mix. So adding in, obviously we said already, Lone Wolf and Cub. Some obviously I think Seven Samurai, other Kurosawa films are and samurai work is certainly at the forefront of this. And other films from Japan, I would say maybe like some of those early Godzilla films are definitely in the DNA of this movie. But also like you said, Blade Runner. Star Wars, I think some Alien 2 is in there,
Yeah.
really the things that would have inspired Gareth Edwards too as a kid, but also the things that like it's all just a mix of that. So it's like the next level beyond, right? It's this exciting thing of although while Star Wars is being created and you have these wonderful people working within the sandbox, it's interesting to see, in my opinion, what these people could do with that experience outside of the sandbox and what can they create originally with their own minds and can they do they have the gusto to create something that says something about the world and society that we live in or could it be the next grand ip adventure, right? We're in this wonderful world nowadays, at least I would say in the last 3-4 years here, where we have these directors that are doing that. They're inspired by the films that created Star Wars and Star Wars itself and then trying to branch off and create things of their own. Like this is an example. I think Rebel Moon is an example. I would say even
Yeah.
Dune, the modern take of
Mm.
Dune by Denis Villeneuve is an example of this in practice, right? Even though he had the book was created before Star Wars came out,
Right.
the film that is created in 1984 of David Lynch's Dune is certainly doesn't happen if Star Wars 1977 doesn't happen,
Mm,
at least in the visual element that is it comes out as, right? And 2021, 2023, or 24 Dune 2, um Dune and Dune 2 part 2 don't look the same nowadays if there isn't Star Wars 1977 that comes out, as well as the other things too around it. So I think this, if you're a science fiction fan, this is a really great time and a film that adds to this new wave of science fiction, original science fiction that is coming out, that is just kind of pushing the boundaries, and it may not work for everybody. And I think this film, like we've said, has some elements that are maybe sometimes it is style over substance overall, but it is trying. It's trying
yeah.
to fit itself into this mold and create this language that is moving cinema forward. And I think where this movie really sings, it excels, is in the visual elements and visual effects of it. Because for a film that is of its budget, 100 million, it looks really darn good for that.
Yeah.
And really, it only we'll talk about this a little bit more later. So we'll hold on this larger conversation later. But it's a shame that both this and Godzilla minus one comes out in the same year because they're both excellent examples of how visual effects can be done with minimal budget. But I think
Yeah.
there are larger reasons for why, and we'll talk about that later. So, um, yeah, I think this certainly fits into that category of Lucasfilm adjacent, right? It takes the DNA of Star Wars, but then says, "All right, I'm going to do this in my own sandbox with it and see what I can do with it." Now, Gareth Edwards has the unique experience of having worked on a Star Wars film. The wonderful Rogue One, a Star Wars story, has his name attached to it. Now, I say that he has his name attached to it because there's debate over how much is
It's
actually Gareth
true.
Edwards, and who gets the victory lap, because there's a guy that's currently working on a show based off of one of the characters and that is super successful on Disney Plus, and probably what people would say is one of their favorite things in the Star Wars galaxy right now, and Andor. So Timmy Gilroy kind of won the Rogue One battle in some way in the legacy of it, but Gareth Edwards still gets to have his name on the film, and I'm sure in 20, 30, 40 years we'll get the actual story of what happened and who's really involved and took credit for certain things and the reshooting of it that happened over time. But because of that experience and working on Rogue One, how do you think that endeavor, that experience helped prepare Gareth Edwards for this movie, because he didn't I don't know how many films he's done in between. I think he did one for Netflix in like 2019, 2020. I think I saw some,
I
like,
actually don't think he
wasn't
did,
super
because
popular. Yeah.
he did Godzilla before,
Yep,
which is an
exactly.
excellent Godzilla movie, and then Rogue One, and then I think because I remember a long spell where you're like, "He should have another job."
He
Like,
should.
Rogue One is really good, and, like, what's going on with that? And then this came through. Um, it's such a fascinating question to me, what happened with Rogue One, and I
Yeah.
think in some ways Rogue One is just a traditional story of, like, a movie got most of the way there, needed to do some reshoots, needed to do some pickups, and he
Right.
simply wasn't available, and yet the other version of that, which seems just as plausible, as he didn't like the changes they want to made, so they brought in Gilroy, and it's really, I think you're right. We're not going to know till, like, everybody involved is dead or so far into a long career that they don't care anymore. Kind of like we'll never get the full story of Harrison getting his leg broken in the
Oh, yeah.
Falcon until there's no potential for lawsuits any further. Um, so it, I think watching the creator this time, so many elements of Rogue One are visible in this film
Mhm,
that
mhm.
it felt to me like, okay, we got a lot of Gareth's aesthetics, his sensibilities, like the kinds of things
Yeah,
he wanted to create felt so present in this film and in Rogue One. And actually, right from that opening sequence when the SEAL team comes out of the water, there was footage of stormtroopers doing
there
that
was.
in the
Oh my gosh.
press and all
The
that. And then
Maldives
it,
on in the water, I mean,
yeah,
we're thinking of the same shots. I'm like, "Where were they in the movie? Where's the
they're just
alternate
not
cut?"
there. So he must have had that visual in his head and done that. And then a lot of the spaceship just looks like the Scarif shield gate as well.
Yes.
So
Yep.
it seems to me that, I think Gareth got to play in the Star Wars play sandbox, which is really, really fun, but it's hard because there are a lot of stakeholders. So I imagine you could come out
Mhm.
of that experience. Actually, I'm kind of thinking of Ryan Johnson going to Knives Out, where he's like, I
Sure.
had to do something so big and so slow and so ponderous to, like, get this made. I just want to do something fast and quick, and I control it all and I
Give
make the
me it. Yep.
decisions. Yeah, so I think it's probably a lot like that experience. But then, the other piece of Gareth on Rogue One is you were talking before about George's politics and how he views the original Star
Mhm,
Wars.
mhm.
And the moment for me that like what's the internet meme? Oh no, we're the baddies, or sorry, are we the baddies of the
Yeah, yeah.
is the moment in on Jeddah when the tanks are coming through and they look very much like footage I had grown up on of our occupying forces in
Mhm,
Afghanistan and
mhm.
Iraq, and it's the stormtroopers, and you're like, oh wait, are we the
Is
baddies?
this
Like,
play
I
about
thought.
us?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I do think that kind of sensibility, and let me try to tell a story that says something about military and about imperialism and about all of
Mhm.
that, I think got sparked in Rogue One, and he thought, let me play with those visuals. So then when you get the giant armored wheeled transports here in the creator, it
Mhm,
feels
mhm.
reminiscent of that moment. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it feels like Star Wars. And then it's like, oh wait, it actually just feels like his Star Wars. It's like his Gareth, and
Yeah.
it feels a little like Lost too, but that's okay. It happens.
A little bit
Um
all the above.
so I think those things. And then on a more technical side, Gareth has shared that he liked to build sets kind of as real as possible, like
Mhm.
360-degree sets. So it wasn't just the facade of a building. They built the building and then they could shoot and figure it out on the day. And I think, there's a lot more kind of digital scenery here than it seems like there is in Rogue One, but it felt like he was out there, like, trying to be real and in the environments. This is not a we shot on the volume type of movie. So I
Yeah.
think all that came from his experiences on Rogue One at that level as well.
Yeah, I think just being able to handle a larger budget film. I think his experience with Godzilla might be like the real foray that's like, okay, I can handle this, because that's how, according to Kathleen Kennedy, how he got the job. It's like we saw that
Mm,
and we're like, this guy deserves to make this next film.
yeah.
And there's a cut out there, from what I've heard, where everyone survives the end of Rogue One. And then, according to the story, Disney said you can kill off all these people. And then they're like, great. Well, now we have like 2 months to shoot it all. Star Wars Celebration
Mm.
is this week. We need to film while we're doing this here. And that's kind of how the story goes. Tony Gilroy was working on set while he was doing post production, and Gilroy was doing second director, whatever, however you want to call it, for the pickup shootings, and filmed the rest of it. And that's how we got to where we're at today, with the final product that is Rogue One, a Star Wars story. But I think you're exactly on the ball there with like the mix of like dealing with the practical versus the digital of it all, which can be daunting for some of these indie people that come into these big stories, right? I think that for a while there, the Marvel Cinematic Universe was doing a good job of like
Mm.
picking up these indie directors that had worked with low budget films and then said, "Here's 200 million, make a movie,"
Let's
and
see
they
what you
kind
can
of hit
do.
some
Yeah.
home runs with those. And then I would say probably some people would argue that in recent runs they have not necessarily hit the big out of the park grand slam swings with some of those films with that same approach, which they've retracted that a bit and course corrected it with some of these upcoming projects and recent projects that they've done with that endeavor in mind. So all in all, I think that it certainly helped with this, and it gave them, I think it just, for anything, like you said, kind of proves a lot of the cinematic language of Rogue One is Gareth Edwards. Like that's his DNA, and that's why his name is on the final product, directed by Gareth Edwards. He was, of course, the main guy on the press tour. Tony Gilroy was like, I ain't doing no press tour for this. He's come around, and that's an interesting story for a different day,
Yeah.
of talking about how Tony Gilroy has gotten enough money where he's willing to talk about Star Wars on camera and to audiences to motivate people to watch his upcoming programs. But yeah, and also the ILM of it all, being the main special effects team working on this film. I think that relationship built during that time, and the people that he worked with, I would say, probably worked a lot on this movie too. And having a good cadence with those folks would certainly, I think, prove to be a positive thing in the end of all things here. And it seems, I just looked it up while you were sharing your ideas. This did confirm. I did confirm that it was Rogue One and then this. There was nothing in between for
Yeah.
Gareth Edwards. So he certainly had a lot of time to think about this story. And we talked about the effects. So or we've kind of hinted at it, and a lot of times visual effects are hindered in a movie when there's a lot of voices in the room, and reshoots need to be done, and things need to be changed along the way. And that's where you get wonky CGI about things, when there's too many chefs in the
Yeah.
kitchen. And because this is probably $100 million budget, original IP, no expectations, one-off story, there probably wasn't a whole lot of hands in there, and he was able to just exact a vision from the start to finish. And that's probably why you were able to see some scenes 2 months beforehand. There's probably still some work to be done, but that's why in the end product, I think it looks pretty good. So I think all that came into play here. But let's talk about the concept of artificial intelligence, or AI, which is central to the story here. It's kind of the thing that drives it all. So and it's a concept that is really, I would say, everything is AI. You can't watch TV. You can't watch TV these days without being like, well, your phone is AI generated power or anything like that. Like you go online, oh, use our new AI Google search. Google's been using AI since 2000, right? That's why there's
Mm.
autofill searches have been a thing. So it's like it's not a new concept, but it's just it's a thing that people talk about more these days. So overall,
You
what do you
can't,
think?
for example, assign easy homework assignments because I
You would
all I
know.
get is all I get is AI. Yes, sorry to
Oh
interrupt,
man.
but yeah, it's on
Speaking of
my
which,
mind daily.
it is certainly on your mind. I want to hear what you have to say. So this question here is like, what do you think this film has to say about the usage of AI in society?
It's really tricky because I was trying to kind of place where we were with AI when this came out. And
Hmm.
certainly again then you have to, like, okay, when he wrote it, when he got the
Yeah,
funding, like, where would they have been in development? Cuz obviously, like you just said, things have been around forever, but the real, like, calling it all AI and building that point really happened like February, March of 2023. So then
sure.
to be in September, it's certainly riding high, and we're all thinking about it a lot more. But what's really curious, and I think some of the critics kind of hammered it on this point, is that it doesn't seem to really want to definitively tell you AI is good or AI
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
evil. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think if it had a message about AI, I would probably say that it is pointing out to us that AI is just going to be another human tool, and
Yes.
it's not inherently evil and it's not inherently virtuistic. It just is a tool, and it depends who's holding the tool and what they choose
Yeah.
to do with it. And so, I there's some really interesting moments. I think it starts in the confrontation in the house, where one of the army guys is
Mm-hmm.
like, "I hope you haven't gone native," meaning like, "I hope you
Yeah.
haven't switched sides." And well, when we were talking about original sci-fi, I realized we just totally skipped Avatar, but it
Oh
belongs in
my
the
gosh.
mix
Yeah.
of
I
that as
mean,
well.
yeah,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
certainly working on those same kind of older stories inspired by things. And although Cameron's more Lucas's generation than the new guys, but I do think that that kind of story, that kind of familiar
Mm-hmm.
Fern
Mm-hmm.
Gully, Dances with Wolves. It all depends when you grew up. But Pocahontas as well. Like that kind of familiar story is hinted at here, but isn't what is being
For
told
me, it's The
here,
Last
right?
Samurai. Sorry to cut you
Oh,
off.
okay. Yeah, there you go. That's true. So yeah, it's like it's in the mix of ideas, but it doesn't really want us. I don't think Gareth wants you to walk away being like, AI is great, I should,
Yeah.
help
Yeah.
our AI advance. I think he wants you to think about bigger questions about humanity, what it means
Sure.
to be human, which are things we're confronting now, slightly. I joke about, so I just was grading some responses. It was MLK Day last week, and I assigned Letter from a Birmingham Jail and gave the easiest assignment: pick any two quotes, tell me how they relate to our class themes. And I got like, Dr. King preaches upon the duality of man and blah blah. I was like, you didn't, like, no undergrad talks like this, and of course it's all Chat GPT. And but so it's silly and it's frustrating, but
Talks to
it's
the
also
duality
like,
of man. That's a good one.
yeah, yeah. But it also then becomes like the question of what makes us human. And like, okay, so you fudged the silly writing assignment that wasn't too deep, and you got it was literally 1 point in their final grade. It's like, okay, you got your 1 point by going to AI, but like, what are you then cheating yourself of? And
Yeah.
what
What are you
parts of
gaining?
the yeah, yeah. And if you're in school here to get grades, fine, but you're really here to prepare yourself and to learn and to open yourself up to the ideas in Letter from a Birmingham Jail or
Sure.
whatever
Sure.
next. So I think a lot of those questions are in the mix here, and obviously the specific questions surrounding Alfie as an AI that will grow and change over time, like
Mm-hmm.
not only is a child but will grow. um but some of the things that I will remember is in the, I believe it's the battles around the bridge, where there
Mm-hmm.
are people crying over a dead robot, and you see that striking visual, and you're like, well, would we really do that? And then I think about like when my cell phone cracks and I get like, oh, my buddy is hurt, right? Like you
Yeah.
you get that kind of relationship
Yeah.
with some of
Personification
these.
is real. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I do think that Gareth is interested in kind of displaying some of those and getting us to question it.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand critics who would say, no, that's a fault, he should be telling us what to think. But I much prefer this, which is, let me raise a bunch of questions and you go
Hey,
explore them and
you're
kind of
thinking
think
about
about
it more afterwards because of
them.
that.
Yeah. Having that great conversation in the diner or coffee shop after.
Sure, sure. I mean, it's absolutely right, I'm sorry that those kids. I mean, the Lever from Birmingham Jail is a really well done bit of prose. So, like,
Yeah.
they missed out on that one by, there's the great thing about, in hindsight, I know people, when you're in the middle of a university degree program, you kind of have to take your battles as they come. But in hindsight, once you're past it and you look back on your experience, a lot of things that I look fondly upon are like, wow, I was exposed to a lot of different things, and
Mm.
whether I liked it or not, I enjoyed the process of reading things that I would have never been like read or watched just because it was assigned to me. Like, that's the point as a professor, is to expose students to a variety of different things and then make them think critically about it. And that's something that maybe I'm worried about the future because, as you can tell,
Yeah.
because I worry about the critical thinking skills that are lost by people just putting things into a thing, getting the argument, and then regurgitating that information rather than coming to reading something, creating an argument or decision for themselves, and then communicating that back. That I think those are important skills that are certainly lost in the AI conversation, or when you're utilizing it, especially to a large degree. But the flip side of that is it's here. It's not going anywhere. It's not like
Right.
we like it's a wild to think that even in the America that and the West that they create in this story has outlawed AI. Like, is that even possible these days? I don't even think that is possible in
No.
such a thing because, like you said, literally if you put into Google and you type in 3 letters and it starts autofilling with suggested searches, like that's AI to a degree. If you do
Yeah.
spell check on your Microsoft Word, which you've been doing since 2002, that is to a degree some sort of a AI thing. It's taking a code and then it's analyzing everything, and there you go. You play a video game and you're playing a single player campaign and you have other enemies that are fighting against you to defeat you. That's some sort of artificial intelligence that was created. It's just it isn't as profound as this robot is now in this with a sentient speaking voice pattern and has quote unquote might have feelings, I don't know, and is taking trying to take me out here because it believes in values and honor and whatever things that it's been coded with. But ultimately at the end of the day, someone coded that. Like, I think that's exactly what it says here, is like humans created this. Like, it's our responsibility to define what it is, how we use it, what are the ethics that surround it, and it's up to us to determine how we utilize it as a tool in this modern world. But again, it's like I tell people in conversations, they're like, I'm so afraid of AI. And I'm like, I don't know if you should be afraid of it or not, but it's just like, once you accept that it's here, like you can, you kind of get past a lot of that fear to begin with. And you're like, okay, how can I incorporate it? What am I comfortable incorporating it into my daily life? Or how is it already incorporated in my daily life that I wasn't already aware of? And that's how I think we can kind of have better conversations about it than a lot of the fear-based media that is out there right now, where it's like AI is coming to get you.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I come to my podcast studio to not talk about my day job, so this is a little bit,
How dare I?
um, but a lot of professors that I talk to. So for people who don't know, because I don't always share my actual impressive
Sure.
credentials, I share my Instagram followers
Dr.
instead.
Cass, come
Uh,
on, tell us.
so I'm the director of a writing program, and so I lead a very small department. There are 4 of us full time at a small university. We have about 1,500 undergrads. So,
Hmm.
I lead this small department, and a lot of professors are very adamant that AI should not be a part of our education system at all. Like you're saying, they want to put it back in Pandora's box. They think that's possible,
Hmm.
and I'm constantly having that conversation. You were just explaining that. I'm like, okay, so if you tell your students no AI, what do you actually mean? Because I don't know a single student who doesn't have Grammarly downloaded and gets
Sure.
those
Sure.
suggestions kind of automatically. And most of those professors, and every professor is a little different. I'm painting with a broad brush in a nuanced thing, would be the first to dock points for bad grammar and say you
Yeah.
should have used a grammar checker, you should have used a spell checker. And so, and then where's that line of then like, well, it makes a style suggestion, not correcting an error, but suggesting a different wording, and where does that
Yeah.
come from? And I actually think the movie is very smart about this by showing the different generations of AI
Hmm.
and the ways in which the ones that we see different reactions to each generation of AI. And I think, that speaks to the same mindset I see in my colleagues, which is like, it's okay if it's like this kind of robot that I can identify, but then it's a crime if it really is pretending to be a human,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And again, I think that maps on to a lot of our attitudes about chat gpt is if it's presented as AI generated kind. Well, the fights we see on Instagram about art, we want people
Yeah.
to tag it and say this is AI generated art. Or when Marvel used AI for the credits of that one
Secret
show,
Invasion. Yes.
Secret Invasion, so memorable, that we so when they use that, and people got really upset. And again, it's like, you're into these very deep questions about what does it mean to be an artist and to control your work, and how
Mhm.
is it being exploited. And so, like, we want it kind of visible to us at this stage. It feels like we want to know when we're getting AI and when we're not. And I think that is going to become less and less possible. And the metaphor of that being to move from the first generation into the more human looking ones. Um, I abused my AMC stubs this week to go see Companion, which is a horror movie, a lot
Wow.
not
Dog,
the same
man, and
rating as the
companion.
creator.
You're just,
You know,
seeing it all.
just hitting all of the quadrants. But Companion is asking a lot of these same questions, and so I think it speaks to Gareth was kind of a little bit ahead of the curve, and now there's so much art kind of asking these deep questions about
Mhm.
kind of humanity. Because and I'll close by saying, what I really think about it in terms of teaching is, like, if I pretend it doesn't exist, my students are just going to use it anyway, and they're
Yeah,
going to be
exactly.
less prepared for the job force, right? Like,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
mean, it's a hard thing, yeah.
they're going to be handed press releases written by AI and told to revise it and edit it, just like I tell
To
them
make it
to
look like it's
revise
a
and edit
human,
their
yeah.
partners. Yeah, exactly. And to put your own voice in it. And so, like, what makes them marketable in the future is, as you
Mm,
were saying, that same critical thinking and those ideas. And the movie here is playing with a further advancement that even some of that
sure.
material isn't there. But this constant refrain in the film of who gets to go to heaven is
Mhm,
a
mhm.
reminder that, no matter what, we're still going to kind of evaluate and sort, which seems to be what we humans love to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the movie too, like, he has that mechanical arm. So, like, in a way, that's some sort
Yeah.
of coding that was created, like, that's again, when they're like, "We've outlawed artificial intelligence," I'm like, he's kinda using it in his arm. It's
Yeah,
artificial, and it's
absolutely.
somewhat of, like, an intelligent thing that is moving around there. It's just like, okay, where are we drawing the line here? Right? Like, your politicians are misleading you in this whatever new America that they've created. New Asia, at least, is, like, incorporating it, and they seem to be running a fairly decent ship over there. Like, people
Yeah.
seem to be a lot happier over there than in this kind of oppressive society in the West there. I mean, it was scapegoated, right? I think that's something that modern times are certainly doing too, where we are. A lot of people are like, like you said, AI is bad. We can't. It's open. Got to close that box again. We got to go
Yeah.
back to before times. Typewriters come out. Your handwriting in cursive for these things, versus, like, instead of having the approach where it's like, all right, it's out there. What do we do next? Like, how do we put
Yeah.
parameters around this? Where is our university ethics code about, like, where we draw the line? What is too much? I don't know if your school uses Blackboard for submitting assignments still. I know I had it in grad school, and I certainly had it in undergrad. If you submitted a paper, it would automatically tell you, like, all right, it is like 4% plagiarized, 5%. Like, it
Yeah.
was scary. I'd be like, I can tell you 100% I didn't do a thing. And but it'd be like, what if it, like, sees something there that, like, someone wrote in India or something like that, that's published
Mm.
online, that I didn't even consider as a thing, and then they were able to connect the dots on that. But I digress. There again, it is a part of the system already. Systems are using it, and again, if you're not kind of with it, you're behind the curve. So it's interesting when you're saying, like, I have to prepare kids for the being marketable and to know these things. And it's a larger conversation too, especially, like, as a parent. I'm sure you're like, I would love for kids to, like, grow up in a world like I did, where they have minimal, like, screen time and stuff like that. But, like, yeah, they in this modern age, they have to know how to work an iPad and an iPhone,
Yeah.
because they're going to be behind where other friends are at, and they might be bullied because they don't know how to do this kind of stuff. Like, it's a different world that we live in, and times are changing, and if you're not with it, you're against it at some point.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And my Alfie moment, like, we debated. So my son, as I said, is 9. He turns 10 in June, and so for Christmas we were really debating what to get him, and finally decided, let's get him his own iPad, because he's
Hmm.
used our devices and so on. And it was very much this, again, I think Alfie's almost a metaphor for this, how she can control all electronics, because he gets the same model iPad that the rest of us have. We knew the tariffs
Yeah.
were coming, so we're like, let's get it now
Get
before
it
it. Yeah,
now.
yeah. And So, like, within, like, 2 days, he's opened up GarageBand and is composing songs, and he's opened up
Yeah.
Photo Booth and is doing all these things, and I'm looking at my wife, I'm like, "Did you know our iPads did this?" Like, I had no idea, and we
What
have all
power
the
we
same
really had at our
software.
fingertips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I think there
Mhm.
is I sometimes think we overestimate digital natives because the number of students I see who can't do like a control F search
It's
or
true.
something like that.
Turn something into a
But
PDF. It's
yeah. But, I do think that, the idea of, being at home in these devices, it's going to be different, but not necessarily bad, right?
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
there are ways to manage that. And I think, again, I have the joy and the pain of spending a lot of time with 18-year-olds, and I do think we're kind of seeing a swing back. Like they all are addicted to their phones. They're, same as the rest of us, but
Mhm, mhm.
like, I keep getting these little glimmers where they hate it. Like, they know it's bad, and if I ask them, like, "Come up with a research topic," mental health and social media, phone
Mhm.
addiction always comes up. It's like I'm not good with my 7, or 12 steps, but recognition is one of the first ones, right?
Sure, sure,
It's like
yeah.
they recognize there's a problem, they can admit there's a problem. They're not yet at the
But they're
changing
not
the
ready to make a
behaviors.
change yet.
Yeah, yeah, because there's all of that social pressure and all that,
Mhm.
but, like, I think they can tell how broken things are with those, screen time and so on, so they will be the new Asia, not the America.
Who knows what America becomes next week. Oh
True.
boy. Oh boy. All right. Well, let's get into some of the visual effects of this movie, which again I think are just stunning. So, given the budget, why do you think the results within this movie were so profound?
So the only insight I have from Gareth's Q&A, because he was very proud of this and explained
Hmm.
that the only way this movie gets made and gets this is he can set the budget. And you
Hmm.
rightfully connected it to Godzilla -1, which was like it wasn't quite a DIY, but it was like call all your friends, let's do it at
Let's
home.
get
and
together.
and
Yep.
everything everywhere all at once had that too, where the
Hmm.
Daniels would reach out and pull in like all their buddies to fix effects shots and so on. Um, so what Garrett said is what got a lot of that work done is simply by shooting plates. So the fact that
Hmm.
they are not building a jungle, they go. He would take, he called it guerrilla filmmaking, with a
Hmm.
very small crew of 3 or 4 people, and go to a remote beach in Thailand and shoot all the backgrounds and just get all of that put
Okay.
into place. And then they can do the small effects within that plate that make it look sci-fi. And
Hmm.
there are so many wonderful shots in this film that feel really real, where you're looking across like an expanse of water or a hill, and there's like a tower, or there's 1 or 2 things that stand out, like, oh, that's right, we're in the future, or there are a couple robots in it. But as much as possible, he just kind of got those real basic plates and then could edit
Hmm.
on top of those. um and then just the design matters. You're right to point out that it was ILM, but they came up with really cool things. I don't think it's Doug Chang. I always want to
I don't
just
think he did
give all
either. Yeah, I don't think he worked
I
on
I want
those.
to give him all credit because he's a god amongst men. But I there are lots of talented designers, and I think
Sure.
coming up with these robot literally shapes, and the kinds of aircraft and the
Yeah.
kinds of vehicles, all of that was really well done, so that it felt futuristic but not so far beyond kind of where we are.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and then I was thinking in this rewatch, the weapons targeting reticle is very silly. Like, if you start thinking about it in terms of like, we put a space station in space and then it's got to build its
And
little
then it rains
crosshair.
down. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, every one of those shots where you see the kind of sweep of the light over whatever landscape it's on is really
Hmm.
stunning and just wonderful to see. And yet, like, it's pretty cheap, right? Because it's just a shot of jungle that they sweep a kind of light effect across. And
That was
I
pretty good.
I thought those were really stunning, and still kind of knowing that that's kind of the core of the movie, like, I was still impressed by them on this viewing.
You see, Greg, without knowing it, I just had the clairvoyance to know that you were the right person for this because you had this Q&A with Gareth Edwards to give us these added details here that we'd have never had been privy to, right? It would have just been like, yeah, the visual effects are great, but no, you're like, he had plates there. He had called in his buddies, like we're guerrilla. I love that phrase you use there, guerrilla filmmaking. There, like it just
Mm,
it seems like obviously it still is a bigger budget. It's not like he did this for like
yeah.
$10 million or anything like that. Um, but coming out of that experience of Rogue One, he probably needed to sit and breathe and take a break for a while. Which Ryan Johnson was like, I need to just do a $10 million film and kind of get my thoughts out there. Which we can have a
Mm.
conversation at a later date about how I think Knives Out is a response to the criticisms of the Last
Oh,
Jedi.
yeah,
Oh, I think
definitely.
it's totally there. It's totally there. I walked out of that theater and I was like, yep, he had some things to say about his experience on that movie.
Well,
um,
and I've been debating for a long time, Dave Bautista's character in the second one, if you look at
mhm.
his fingers, he has a First Order tattoo,
Yes, he
so I
does.
swear but then I think maybe Dave Bautista just has that tattoo, I
He
can't
did
tell,
though.
so
He does though. Yes.
okay, okay. But they didn't cover it up, so yeah.
No, 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 no. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot in the wonderful Knives Out cinematic universe that we can talk about.
Yeah.
But I think for this, like, yeah, he was like he got to have this singular vision. No hands were in the pocket here. Like it's not like a MODOK situation where like they're working on it 2 weeks up before the film is final cut. And
Yeah.
and that's what causes a lot of these films to look wonky. I see on the internet all these days where people are like, CGI in 2008 used to be so much better. What happened over the years, right? They'll show like the Davy Jones from
Oh, yeah.
Pirates of the Caribbean, or they'll show like scenes from the uh, Transformers films from 2007 and 2009. And it's because like films took longer to make back then. Like it was 3 years in between sequels oftentimes, and now we're on a quicker 2 year basis. And that's if you're lucky that you have a script like I think The Last Jedi was kind of that rare instance where the script was done and they were ready to shoot a month after The Force Awakens came out. So
Yeah.
that's why that film looks particularly great. It's because they got right to work right away, and Ryan Johnson had at least 8 months of post production time to oversee all the visual effects shots for this. So I think this is exactly that case too, where he was like, I get to work in my own sandbox. No one's really they don't I mean it's not a whole big commitment to this thing. I think because I'm connected to Star Wars and it looks like Star Wars to some degree and it's sci-fi and it's coming out in August where nothing really else comes out in the summer season. People go
Yeah.
see this because they need something to do, and it's hot outside, and movie theaters are historically known as being a nice air conditioned place that you can get out of the
Absolutely.
heat for a few hours. So um I think that all worked in its favor. And again, it's unfortunate that a wonderful film like Godzilla Minus One came out with an even scrappier budget
Yeah.
of like 13 million, I think, was the final budget for that thing, with most of it obviously going to visual effects. And it's just fantastic work over there. I mean, deservedly won the Oscar for that. But I think maybe any other year, this might get that if it's nominated without that right up against it. So I think it's a true testament to how visual effects can look good given the time and space, rather than having. I think what was in recent years, they've had these visual arts studios unionize and go on
Yep.
strike because they're like, we don't make any money from these things because we have to put in bids for contracting for these work for these pieces of work, and then we have to do like 6 weeks of overtime to get this thing undone because some studio exec was like, this needs to look differently. And then we have to
Yeah.
change the design of everything and go back to the beginning and change it all over again. So this poor guy in his office at home is doesn't spend any time with his family, and he's just working on this design of this character that no one sees in the background. And then they see it, and he's like cross-eyed, and he's like, "What do you expect me to do? I'm just living off of Monster Energy drinks and Uncrustables."
Oh, we've all been there. Yeah. I well, and I was just looking around a little bit because this also has a bit of I think it benefited actually because I believe it was a 20th Century Fox movie that was well on into production before Disney's
Before the sell,
purchase
yeah.
of that studio, and it does have the beautiful Star Wars style opening with the 20th
Oh,
Century
I, mi-
Fox
I miss
fanfare
the, I
that
miss the fanfare. Yeah,
I know. I mean, I love the sequel trilogy, but it we should have just faked it. Like, let's just pretend it was, if they did it today, they probably would,
They
right?
might. They probably would.
They'd
Yeah.
call it a 20th Century Fox film. So I do think it also benefited from like nobody's watching in some ways, right?
Mhm.
Like you were just saying, the studio executive that just has to change the look of it, or the internet saying
Yeah,
Sonic the
low
Hedgehog's
hanging
teeth
fruit for
don't look
Iger.
right.
He's not
Yeah,
concerned
yeah.
about this.
So I think it benefited a little from that, and that, like you said too, the low expectations. Like it didn't have to be Star Wars or Avatar, so
Mhm.
it could float a little bit. But the other connection I make a lot too, obviously because of John David Washington, is to Tenet, right? Which
I think that's a
has
great
those
app.
same
Yeah.
kind of stunning sequences, but is on a very on the ground scale. Like all the big effects moments are not like giant spaceships invading and
Mhm.
all of that.
Mhm.
And I think that tactile, I almost said tactical because it was the military, but the tactile feel of it, that we're on the ground and in the kind of groupings with these soldiers, just helps the visual effects a lot too, because we get so wrapped up in the story. The silly little bombs that run, I think, are awesome.
I
They're
think
they're
so
so
too.
funny and like really creative. And then you think about that as a visual effect, and it's pretty simple, because you take the whole environment and
Mhm.
you just put one little figure running across the bridge, and you have an incredible sequence, and you put
Yeah.
in the sound design and the Hans Zimmer score, and it totally works, but is deceptively cheap.
That's right. Did Zimmer do the score? I completely missed that. Did Zimmer do the score for this?
He did, well, and I'm sure you recall, but
Ah.
listeners might not, that he was supposed to do Rogue One, and then
Mhm.
when the reshoots and all that happened, that's when he had to back out. I believe he had to go do a Wes Anderson movie, maybe Grand Budapest Hotel, and so he backed out of Rogue One at the last second, and Giacchino got something like a month, maybe less, like to put together the Rogue One score.
I think it was like 2
So
weeks.
yeah, it was unbelievable, and he did a great job there. Some great sequences in Rogue One with
That's
score, but
crazy.
I
Yeah.
believe Gareth was like, "I get to work with him," and unless he did Godzilla too, but I think it was like brought it to
No,
fruition
Hans didn't
that
do
he
a
could get there.
Godzilla. Yeah, he didn't
Oh,
do
okay,
that.
good.
He was busy
So,
interstellaring it up at that time.
oh yeah, just all these movies that when I think of the score is just like wow, right?
That's
Like the
crazy.
the
Hans
big
is
noise.
too busy. I don't know where he sleeps. Like, does that man sleep at night? He's on tour. He's doing all this stuff. Like,
Yeah,
come on,
yeah.
come on. Yeah, I think this film is astounding, and as we're seeing with the trailer that came out today, I mean, a movie that comes out in count 'em at least 6 months from now. Um,
Mm,
that the trailer looks spectacular with the dinosaurs. Like, I know they already
yeah.
have like this visual language already for dinosaurs, it being the seventh installment of this series, but to have a trailer look that good 7 months out from the film's release, I mean, like, God, they're still going to work on this thing, so it's only going to make it look even better. Even the Fantastic Four one too. So we're living in this great era of CG visual effects looking pretty good months out. So hopefully these final products still continue to be the actual product that is released months in advance.
Yeah, I think I immediately asked after it was office hours that I watched the Jurassic World trailer during today, because nobody came, so I was sitting there with my iPad out, and I'm like, I'm just gonna do this, and one of the first things I thought of, since we'd been thinking creator this week, I was like, I wonder if he then brought some of what he learned to try to
Hmm.
make that
Hmm.
cheaper.
I would think so.
Obviously, I don't think they have to worry about budget with with the Jurassics,
They
but
have like 200 million. Yeah.
yeah, but it helps, and he's obviously got some big stars in the mix here
Hmm.
that want big salaries and deserve big salaries. So, it'll be interesting to see if I mean, ideally we wouldn't be able to tell if they did this kind of smaller scale effect, so we'd be lost in the moment. But I'm really, even before the trailer I was really excited, but the trailer just confirmed, like, Gareth is a good filmmaker, and I think for the rest of my life his name on a trailer will mean I show up kind of no matter what, because I
Yeah.
trust him.
I think he's definitely worked his way into that Ryan Johnson way of the fandom to be like, yeah, if he releases something, I'll go watch it because I want to support this guy because I think he did great with Star Wars and I like his overall
Yeah.
filmography. And I'm gonna just keep supporting this guy because you never know. You're always welcome back into the fold if something comes up, right? Ron Howard, great example. You never know.
Never know. Oh, and boy, I mean, it clearly didn't happen, but they should have thrown Gareth one episode of Andor, right? Just pay the
Yeah,
it'd be
yeah,
really like a good reconciliation moment. But for all the drama that we only know some small part of, it probably couldn't happen.
someone's gonna write a
But
great book in about
oh yeah,
20 years once a lot of these NDAs are up and people are
yep.
feeling like, I have
Well,
something to
and
say.
Solo, as you alluded to, right?
Oh my gosh,
All the
man.
making of Solo books are just like dancing around the topics, and I loved the one Rob Bredow wrote about the special effects. It's like we shot this scene on this day and on this day 6 months later. It's like, oh, I really want to know,
I know,
what
I
it
know.
was and all that. But someday,
You know, we have a MegaCon down here in Orlando, and Ron Howard is actually a like meet and greet here.
oh wow,
And
that'd
I
be
was
fun.
tempted to just buy that ticket and then buy the photo opportunity just so I could have maybe 10, 15 seconds alone with Ron
Yep.
Howard to be like, what happened on Solo? Like how did that happen?
Please.
And just hoping that he and the wonderful narrator voice of Arrested Development would then regale the tale of Solo, a Star Wars
Yeah.
story to me. I would just be so enthralled with that whole process. But
Mm,
I digress.
yeah.
Um, Speaking of the creator again, what was your favorite scene from this film, Greg?
Yeah, there are a few that made my list. And I think see, now I'm even second guessing it. So runner up position, I'll give the opening the runner up position because I do think that's pretty stunning with
Mm,
the mix of the forces coming out of the water, the kind of fight through the jungle, and then very quickly establishing some good chemistry between the two actors, and then the betrayal right up to a
hmm.
blast, a nuclear blast. It's like all of that works like really well. And when Frank Marshall talks about the Indiana Jones franchise, he always says like we're just chasing that opening 10 minutes of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like we never got back to that energy, which I don't
True.
agree with, but
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it
agreed.
kind of feels like that big kind of splashy opening that you're kind of chasing the energy of. But um I'm gonna go with the scene at the temple,
Mm,
and it's really purely visuals for me, like the emotional kind of confrontation around the fact that she is still alive but is not really
yeah,
alive, and these
she's
kind of
just a
questions.
vegetable at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and who's the creator, and she became the creator and all that. I care less about that, but like when you see the strike forces coming in low in their aircraft, and you see the villagers, and then those opening salvos where they just like start mowing down the opposition, like
Hmm.
all of that
Hmm.
is so powerful and shocking to me. It's like this weird mix of like idyllic, beautiful scenery and landscape, and then just horrible violence. But then you're like, well, but those are robots, and like it's all such a jumble. It really throws me off balance, and I really just love that whole sequence up until them getting taken away and getting yanked apart onto this two separate aircraft is just
Yeah.
and you don't have to be a parent to be like that's really sad, right? Like it's her yelling is really striking. So
Yeah.
yeah, I could go with some others, but that's what I'm going with.
Okay, that's a really great one. And I think you're right. The juxtaposition between the emotional plus the action really makes that scene sing, I would say,
Mm.
too. And I will say another one that also has that emotional element, but also the action to it. I think we talked about it, or we've hinted at it. I would say I think that bridge scene is just spectacular. The way that they do with
Yeah.
the fog, and you don't know exactly what's coming on the other side there. To me, that in the Gareth Edwards filmography, the lore of it all, I would say that feels very much like Jeddah to me. That whole sequence, just the way it's
Yeah.
scrappy. It feels like Saw Gerrera's partisans are held up at one end, and the Empire is coming down the other way, like the trucks and all that stuff, and they're just coming across this lone bridge
Yeah.
here, and they're holding on for dear life and hoping that this thing goes. And then also in a kind of Star Wars wouldn't be callback because this happened technically after it, but with Alfie going out and doing the thing with
Yeah,
the
essentially
thing
having the Force.
with the Force. Yeah, it's basically like Grogu talking to the Rancor
Oh, yeah,
in Book of
yeah.
Boba Fett. I was like, oh, Alfie pulling off a little bit of Grogu here and going out. I just loved how it was just it felt very Seven Samurai, that whole sequence.
Yep.
And I would say actually it felt it felt very Last Samurai to me. Again, another wonderful film, I will say. I just love how that sequence plays out, and it feels to me. So Gareth Edwards in the lead up to Rogue One was often asked about like what is your favorite sequence in a Star Wars film, and he would say that like the Hoth sequence, like the opening battle
Mm.
of Hoth and Empire, where you're in the trenches and you see the walkers come and you're shooting and all that. He's like, that scene to me as a kid was like an hour long. Like it wasn't actually like the 7 minutes that it really is in the film, but it just felt like that forever. And as I also too feel like that scene is longer than it is. Maybe it's because Star Wars Battlefront, a game that I played frequently in my youth, had missions in those trenches too, where I played those for hours. So it maybe a Mandela affecting that there as well. But this scene in a good way feels longer than it actually is because of the anticipation, because of the unknown coming across the way, and just you. There's a morality to this too, I would say, because John David Washington's Joshua is like, I don't know what side I'm on,
Mm,
but
yeah.
at this point, he's like, I'm on the side of Alfie. He chooses that in this sequence here, and then it leads to, of course, to that scene that you're talking about here later on, where he confronts what's left of Maya, and then the stimulants are like, we can't kill her. Like she's just in the stasis. It has to be
Yeah.
you, and for him to have to like physically do the act and then move on, like that'd be crushing. Like he sees her alive. That was the only thing keeping him going here, and then he has to change. He has to let go of that, and then become this ultimate father figure to Alfie for the while he still can. I think that was just purely poetic here. So that's I think where this film really excels is in those two scenes back to back. So I think we did great in analyzing that.
Yeah, well, I want to agree with everything you said, and I hadn't connected that to Hoth, but I think you're right. A lot of the staging and the action there really
Yeah.
does feel like the reveal of the walkers, and then the kind of crushing, overwhelming force.
Yes. Yes.
One of the great little bits of design I love is I love the tanks with their radar and the way the light just appears on
Mhm.
the victims, and they just start running and they have no whole
Yeah.
choice, and like
Yeah.
it's all really just like inventive and interesting visually. And yeah, I back to your original question of like, is it Star Wars? It's Star Wars, right? Like that's you could
Yeah.
put it with the right kinds of vehicles, and that whole sequence could just be the Empire fighting the rebels.
Could
So
be.
absolutely.
Or it's they've done Seven Samurai in Star Wars. I'm thinking that Mandalorian episode it
Yeah,
just happens on a distant moon. It's just a bunch of raiders attacking a village. It could be a
there it
Star
is.
Wars. Who knows? It's right
Yeah,
there. There's
yeah,
no Empire involved.
absolutely.
There's just Mandalorian just showing up and helping out these band of farmers, and that's it. It's
Yeah.
New Asia. There you go. Um, so like we talked about the AI of it all, but if there's anything else here, let me know. But what do you think? Maybe some of the themes, or what we haven't. If you want to say a little bit more about that, what do you think of some of the themes that viewers should take away from watching The Creator?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would first on the list would go back to the idea of, the kind of common theme across films about AI and robots is always like what makes us human and what is
Hmm.
going
Hmm.
to keep our humanity. And the revelations moving into the third act about the atrocities committed by the government to kind of justify all this, I
Yeah.
think brings those questions into sharp relief, and I'm sad to say will probably be very relevant in the years to come of
Yeah.
what are we responsible for, the classic question from moral philosophers channeled to me through the sitcom The Good Place: what do we
Yeah.
owe each other? Right, like and I think this film is a kind of very complicated version of the what do we owe each
Mm,
other theme, and we owe each other kindness, and we
mm,
owe each other our humanity and our shared dignity, and so much of the sequence we haven't talked about, which I do love the space sequence.
Oh
It's
yeah,
almost like
yeah.
I almost forgot it was there because the bridge feels like the climax,
It
and then the
does,
temple,
yeah.
and then you're like, oh wait,
In
we have
reality,
this
it's the
one
space one.
other.
That's really the final third act
Yeah,
there.
yeah, that's the it felt on this viewing very much like Independence
Mhm.
Day to me, like the ships come
Mm,
down and or
mm,
the ship, but like in that last sequence where they're so committed to each other and they make sacrifices to each other. That's obviously the greatest response to what do we owe each other, and it could be we owe each other to protect
mm.
each other and to lay down our lives for each other. Now I'm getting too dramatic, but
Hey,
um
do it.
and then the fact that last moment that Joshua gets, it is a simulant, but it's a reconnection
Mm,
with Maya, and it's ambiguous. Is it a gift from Alfie? It almost feels like it is, like she knew, but it also just feels like a coincidence in some ways. And
yeah.
but to remind us at the very end that what makes us human is each other and the connections we
Mhm.
share, I think is a wonderful bit of mythology and theme for our current age, for all the reasons we just talked about technology constantly driving us apart
Yeah.
and creating fake relationships. I think a lot of us have been questioning our presence on the internet and our presence on different websites and so on. But to really think about, like, you know, I hate all of those things, but yet I've made incredible friends, and there are rich
Mm.
parts of my life that exist only because of these things. I think that's a reminder that, whatever the technology is, it's a tool and it's what you build with it. And
Yeah.
let's do it.
Well, it is the duality of man, as one of your students once
As
wrote.
the robots told me. Yeah.
It all comes full circle here. That's
Yeah, there it
crazy.
is.
Yeah, it's all the duality of man, which
Uh,
it's funny that I'm remembering now. They say that in Full Metal Jacket when he's wearing the peace symbol on his helmet, but also says
mm.
"Born to Kill." So it's like I am the
Oh, yeah.
duality of man. So uh, a film that definitely represents the we have the capabilities to be the destroyer of worlds, but also the savior of worlds at the same time. And it's really which one are we choosing today? We've created this power, and now we've left it out to the universe, and ultimately, like you said, it's those human connections to us that keeps us from destroying one another. And as soon as we lose that, we lose the empathy for our fellow human beings. We lose the empathy for
Yeah.
the things around us, right? We can personify things like I love my phone. I love my office space here. I love my Funko
Yeah.
Pops, right? These are things that never talk to me, but I put onto them my feelings and emotions, and I get some ironically some feelings and emotions back from them. They make me feel good, and they make me feel
Yeah.
assured of who I am and my and sense of self and all that stuff. So I mean, these are just
Well said.
really wild thoughts that really are spawned by this film, and it's like we said already. This is gonna it's not going away. All these major technological innovations will only go forward. Right, I can only imagine what in the next 5 to 10 years they will have created that we'll be having further discussions about. Of like, oh, should the students have glasses on in their,
Oh.
these glasses that just record the lectures and then take what you've said and distill into 3 sentences
Oh.
basically, and then you're like, okay, great. Now, what's the point of having class at this
Yeah.
point? If you might as well just record the lecture, send it to them, and then they can watch at their own leisure at home and distilled into 3 sentences. I mean, I'm going off on a tangent here.
Yeah. Well, but no, but have an AI watch the video I recorded and record
Yeah,
for
I mean,
them the
it's already
shorter
happening. I
video.
see it in people in meetings. They'll
Turn
just
it
have
into a TikTok.
they're not paying it. Yeah, it'll turn into a brain rot TikTok that has some dude running in the space below it, and then it's the lecture above it. Um, I've already seen it in like meetings at work where people have like some system running concurrently and listening to the meeting, and it's already taking notes on everything
Yeah.
and putting the to do list together, and they're not even doing anything. I'm like, okay, well, hey, if it gives you 5 minutes back into your day that you can do something else with it, then I hope you're using it to good. And
Yeah,
so
yeah, that was
that's all I
that's
can
what I
hope
was
for.
just
If
thinking.
you're using
Yeah.
it, if it's a tool that you're using, I hope that it's furthering society in some way. And if not, I hope you just enjoy those 5 minutes you get of watching TikToks or being on Instagram and doom scrolling. I hope that it gives you some sort of solace at the end of all things here. I do want to
I'm
because
I'm
the way that I'm talking here, it makes me think here. And you said critically about this movie that some people were like, I wish it was more heavy-handed in its statement on whether
Mhm.
AI is good or bad. But in a more allegorical case, another film that came out last year, Oppenheimer, is
Mm.
very much could be an allegory. I think Nolan also said like this is kind of an allegory for in this modern times about AI. Do you think Oppenheimer does a better job of kind of getting that message across that we've kind of talked about here today, where it's like it's out there, people will create things, but it's up to us as a humanity afterwards to determine what is appropriate usage, what is ethically the right case in these scenarios here. What do you think as a man who's seen both of these films and a major Oscar contender last year, as well say as
Yeah.
well.
Absolutely. I mean, well, first you have to get to the last hour of Oppenheimer to get those questions. So a lot of people didn't make it there.
I can't believe
They
it.
yeah, no, of course, always recommend watching the full movie. Look, I stayed to the end of a lot of really bad movies because I always stick them out. It's a really good question, and actually, just to really take it full circle, what came to mind immediately was Ian Malcolm, Jeff Goldblum in the original Jurassic Park. You were
Yes.
so busy wondering if you
Hey.
could, you didn't think about whether you should, and I do think Oppenheimer has a lot of that spirit, and from the moment that was in all the trailers where he's Oppenheimer is asked like, "Will it light the atmosphere on fire?" And Matt Damon's character is like, "Well, I'd
Near
prefer
zero.
zero." Yeah, yeah, instead near zero. So I think that I think Oppenheimer
But then
is
he's like, I think
so
we
in
did later on, right? It's not
Oh,
near
yeah,
zero.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
right, that's right. Oh, I forgot about that line. But I do think Oppenheimer, by having the burden of being so much in its historical
Hmm.
period, that I think people almost didn't
You think they
apply
kind of
the
missed the point
allegory.
to move it forward?
Yeah, because 'cause
Yeah.
they're like, "No,
I
this is
agree.
what happened, and we did this." And I think that's always been an advantage of genre, is that genre, for those of us who love, and again, sci-fi, horror, fantasy,
Hmm.
any
Hmm.
of these kind of more genre experiences, I think we've all been called to these things because of the large questions that they let us explore in a different space, and in it's not a safe space, but in a different space where we don't have to
Yeah.
worry about the reality of it. And I'm a devoted Star Wars franchise member, but I've always heard Star Trek fans talk
Mm,
lovingly about that. Like, the whole
sure.
point of Star Trek is to ask real world questions, and George would say Star Wars is about the morality that we need to
Hmm.
teach from one generation to the next, and how to be selfless, and so on. And so, it's really interesting in the context of Oscars, because between the Oppenheimer year and this year, we're seeing genre getting taken very seriously.
Sure.
Both Nosferatu and The Substance way overperforming, and those are not like barely horror. Those are horror horror.
They're knee deep in it. Yeah.
Nosferatu gore is gothic horror, but especially The Substance, it's a hard watch. And if you're
Oh, yeah. It
squeamish,
was
you're not
great.
gonna make it through. But it's so, yeah, and yet when I get out of The Substance, I don't think of, oh, it was so gory and scary. I think about the really powerful social messages,
Yeah.
and the way it made those messages literal through the genre, and did it. So I think as we continue to see nerd culture just be main culture, I think that's a real advantage, is the tool of genre has become available to more people, and made all of these things more
Hmm.
accessible.
Hmm.
The normies are seeing what we've always seen. In other
Right.
words, it's
Right.
about time.
I agree. And ultimately, art, ultimately being a subjective medium, is like it's there if you want to engage with it. There's always I know people are like there's sometimes my film is just a movie. There's nothing ulterior motive
Yeah.
to it. But I kind of fight against that a bit. I feel like everything, if you want to engage with it, has a deeper meaning to some degree. They just didn't create it just to spend so someone can spend 2 hours thinking about nothing, right? Maybe they
Yeah.
did. I mean, but ultimately, people are still going to project onto it, whether whether it's the intended meaning or not. And I joke oftenly with my wife, like there are people that went to see Oppenheimer or the creator or things like that, and then just watched it, and they're like, yeah. oh, that was a good movie, and then move on with the
Yeah.
rest of their life. They're not just like sitting at home contemplating the greater meaning of what it means or not. But it's interesting that that was a criticism that you're sharing of this movie, where like they wished it was more heavy handed in its message. But I don't know. I still when I talk to people like go see movies and they're just like, yeah, I watched. Let's say, for example, Wicked, another film that's in the conversation zeitgeist this day. They're like, yeah, I watched it, enjoyed it, and then that's it. They don't really have anything else to say there. But that's a movie that I think is very heavy-handed and serves on a silver platter the kind of like social message that it
Yeah.
has. And I think Peter Dinklage is his goat character is the one that literally says like it's cruel what people can do to others when they want to scapegoat them, or so, he says something very similar to that. Like they put down people that
Yeah.
they aren't like them and they want to control them and all that stuff. Um, and I literally turned to my wife and I was like, "Here's the silver platter. It's right there. The social message is right there." And for a lot of people, it just goes right over their heads. So like for
Yeah.
that to be the criticism of this movie, I think is over. It's an oversight, because just because something is like automatically like here's what you should think of it doesn't mean that people will necessarily take that away from it. Versus we've had a nice, I would say, hour 40 conversation here about this
Yeah.
movie without it being so heavy handed to be like this is what you should think about it. Versus we've been able to really get to the conclusion, I think, of what it was trying to say ultimately.
Yeah, I was listening to a film critic actually talking about the Brutalist, and he said something really
Hmm.
funny that the Brutalist is talking about artists and those in power and the relationship between those and things. And they said, I won't spoil the events of the film, but they said at one point it goes from being a metaphor to being a meta five.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that's what you're saying about Wicked. Like Wicked got to it, it was a meta five. Like it's a goat literally telling you that you're being made a scapegoat for the and I think you're right that it is hard and I use the word normie before because we joke on our podcast that like there are all of us weirdos who are at the movies all the time and think this much about movies and so on,
Hmm.
and there's like so much of my life is rich because I do all of that, and that's what I want to spend my time doing is
Yeah,
watching cool stuff and having great conversations like this. And then there are just a bunch of people who have no interest in that, and it is
they
hard
go to
to.
it and they enjoy it and they say, all right, I'll see
That's it.
you next year for my next movie.
Yeah, and then like I think of people who like work, bone crushingly difficult jobs, and like, do I really want to yell at them and be like, no, when you go to Wicked, you need to actually like
Yeah,
map out
you
the
missed the
political
point.
situation. Yeah, like everybody should get to do what they want, and and we're richer for anybody going to the movies and making sure we continue to see this great art being
Hmm.
funded and created. But I do think that to me the unexamined movie experience is a wasted life. So it's great to be able to dig into something and just to connect back to the creator. I would call this movie totally successful, like because of that and
Yeah, I agree.
a little ambiguity is okay. We are in a time where we want to know which team is winning, which team is losing, and what exactly everything indicates about the points or whatever. But if we can just kind of say, like, sometimes we should just see things as ambiguous and puzzle through it and work a little
Hmm.
more on it.
Hmm.
I think that's just as valuable, even if it sometimes feels unsettled when you're in the moment.
I agree. Well, to further the conversation, actually, to a modern current event, I will say is like with a film with loads of ambiguity. The Brutalist is
Yeah.
currently under scrutiny right now for its quote unquote use
Oh,
of
that's right.
AI apparently AI was used for touching up a little bit of Adrian Brody's Hungarian accent in the movie. And it's as Adrian Brody is nominated for Best Actor, the film is nominated for Best Picture. Brady Corbet is nominated for Best Director. What do you think about the usage of if it was? I'm still jury's out if
Yeah,
it totally
for all
was
we
and
know
how
of it.
much,
Yeah.
right? How much to what degree? Um, but what do you think? You've talked already about like, well, people get upset when like artists like if a picture is made with AI or if they use AI in a commercial or if AI is used for the intro credits of a TV show. If it's being used to like touch up performance, where do you think like that is, and if that's a technology that will be keep using. Again, we're saying like
Oof.
it's out there. Like it might just be this is the wave of the future. But like a la a Ben Burt talking to George Lucas in 1999, being like, these guys were in a different take, and I'm just inserting them digitally into this. Like, where do we draw the line? This is the kind of this next modern phase of that. So as you've seen The Brutalist. I've
Yeah.
listened to the Long Take Review episode. It's fantastic. It was
Oh, great.
immediately
Thanks.
what I need to do after my Dog Man watch, and I finally settled down, and I could logically take in like, did I make sure I got this all right? I just it's a 3.5
Yeah.
hour movie with an intermission. Like I wanted to make sure that I make sure I was aware of everything that happened, because in a long movie like that, which could be a little bit convoluted at times, I wanted to make sure that like I knew what the movie was fully getting at. So I was on par with everything. But what do you think about
Yeah.
the AI in that controversy around it?
Well, yeah, and I was a bummer on that episode because I saw The Brutalist so long ago. I saw it in, the night before the election, that Monday night,
Yeah,
and
that
then
was such a unique
yeah.
experience.
I guess I just need to stop going to preview screenings is what one of the lessons from tonight is. But
That
yeah,
was
and
the
then
last
we were
before time movie that she had.
yeah, that's true. Well, in the opening, you said the Brutalist talks about Pennsylvania being America, and that got a huge laugh in my theater because it's like, haha, we're all really
That's
worried
not
about what
wrong.
Pennsylvania is going to do tomorrow, and
Oh
so
yeah.
it was very funny and ended up being a little too real. It is it's interesting on a couple levels. One is
Mhm.
like who's leaking this information and who's trying to take down the Brutalist. It's to me a very interesting question. I see Timothy Chalamet behind a computer, like
Yeah.
grinning because I
I
think,
sang those songs. I went on
yeah.
SNL to prove it.
So I really think he's going to be the one who benefits the most from this controversy, but I don't think it's a big enough deal to sink the movie. But I do think it's
Mhm.
gonna really hurt the chances at the performance Oscar, and
Mm.
I'm not convinced that's fair. I don't really understand how much Adrian Brody knew that this was happening.
Yeah,
I
right.
believe people think he gave consent at some point. But I think Hollywood, especially right after the strikes, is in a moment where they are really concerned about, you know, how AI
Yeah.
is going to change this and how it's going to manipulate them and having their performances kind of done this way. And my gut reaction is like, why did you do this? Like, if his
Mm. Mhm.
Hungarian accent is a little off, like 5 Hungarians will be mad in the theater, and the rest of them will be like, oh, they got pretty close, right? Like,
Yeah.
look, I'm speaking as a guy from Boston. I can tell you right away, it's only Mark Wahlberg. The rest of them are terrible. Like, you watch The Departed, nobody but Mark Wahlberg can do it. Uh,
Not even Damon?
Even Damon does okay, but he's from the rich parts of town, so
Okay.
you can still see it. But or Martin Sheen just doing Mayor Quimby from The Simpsons, basically. And so like, but it's not like I watch one of these movies where somebody is leaning into their Boston accent and it's bad, and I'm like, no, I'm taken out. This movie's awful, and so I
Mhm.
I really wonder what the motivation was here. And I think in the fact that we are so sensitive about AI in the context of acting and movie
Yeah.
creation right now, I think it's terribly timed and it was a bad call. They also, in that same article, revealed that they touched up the singing in Amelia Perez, and that's an even weirder slope because of auto tune existing forever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Well,
how much is that? And so,
how much is that
but
okay
I
with?
think
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
yeah, I think in 5 years, this will just be the norm. We will understand that all performances have been touched up a little around the edges, just like your analogy is perfect. Now they can just take people from multiple takes and put them in the same one, and
And
then
create
we
the
don't
best take ever.
think
Yep.
anything about that, and it's fine. And they superimpose somebody's face, or my
Mhm.
beloved Dial of Destiny in the opening with the CGI Harrison Ford essentially, and the AI generated Indiana Jones as a young person again. It's like
Yeah.
those kind of things really stand out to us now, but over time, I think we're just gonna all stop caring about it. So
I think so
I don't
too.
know. I don't think I think there's a lot more to Adrian Brody's performance, and he should still be fully considered for Best
Yeah.
Actor. But I honestly think it's going to be enough with the other actors voting to sink his chances. Which
I agree.
he's got one. He'll be okay, but it's a shame.
Two-time Holocaust survivor, Adrian Brody. I think this is a definitely a Oscar political move. Like there's
Yeah,
definitely an interesting time in which that story comes out, right?
yeah,
It could have come out weeks ago. It could have come out after the Academy Awards. It maybe would never have come out. Like there's also a
yeah,
timeline where no one cares, and it doesn't really matter at all. Restreamer apparently is the company I think that did it, and they did work on like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like to recreate the Vader voice. Like if James
yeah,
Earl Jones isn't capable to do it, and they want to do they want his iconic voice to always be the theatrical and cinematic voice of Darth Vader, then so be it. If 70-year-old Mark Hamill can't necessarily do the voice for uh 27-year-old Luke Skywalker in Book of Boba Fett, then you kind of have to use some some tools to make that happen.
yeah.
So again, AI is a thing. It's not going anywhere anytime soon, and
No.
these conversations are good that I think we're having as a society to be like, all right, what are we okay with? What are we not okay with? What are the parameters around things? And these are things that hopefully we come to and agree upon, and time will constantly keep testing those boundaries, but we have to arrive at it somewhere. So
Yeah.
just case in point, the creator is at the forefront of determining like just creating conversation around this interesting
Yeah.
topic here. So Gareth Edwards, kudos to
Absolutely.
you, man. Who knows when you created the idea? Was it like in the midst of Rogue One? You're like, hey, man, heard about artificial intelligence. I mean, heck, we didn't even mention AI. Spielberg.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
a
yeah. Oh, of course.
2002 film. I mean, come on. It's
Yeah.
not like this is a new thing. So
No.
and I'll be remiss. I've mentioned a couple times Last Samurai. Ken Watanabe is in this movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The General Tadamichi Kobayashi from Letters from Iwo Jima, right here in the midst.
Yeah.
Also, Godzilla connection. Forgot he was in that too. So definitely a Gareth Edwards staple at this point.
Well, and I was wondering watching Creator, I was like, I wonder if they wanted him for Baze, right? Like no disrespect to that actor,
Oh
but
my
like
gosh!
his role here was
Ye-
kind of close. It evoked Baze, so I was like, oh,
Oh,
he might have
it's a shame because
had a
that actor was
scheduling
really good
conflict, I
for
think.
Baze Malbus, and
Yeah.
but man, the what if now you've created this in
Yeah.
my head. I might
I mean,
dream
you
about
can't
this
be
tonight.
Watanabe. Yeah.
Anywho,
uh,
we're at our last question here, Greg, and this is a fun one. We've gone really deep into this movie. We've talked about a lot of serious topics with grand implications for ethics in the world around us that we live in today. But ultimately, if push came to shove and you had this opportunity pressed in front of you here, would you allow yourself to be scanned or your likeness to be scanned for usage as a stimulant skin in the creator universe?
so my context for this question, listeners, I'm on the call tonight without my glasses on because my prescription is very light, and so I don't. I always wear glasses because I look better in glasses when
Hmm.
I teach. And the other morning, I just forgot them. They were sitting in the bathroom shelf, and I just was like halfway to work, and I realized I'm like,
Oh
I'm not
man.
going back. So I started teaching in class, and I got like 15 minutes in, and everybody was looking at me strangely. And I was like, what is happening? Like, did I spill coffee on my shirt? And then it clicked, and I said, oh, you're all weirded out because I look different because I don't have my glasses.
Hmm. Hmm.
And they were like, yeah, like whoa, whoa. They all reacted. And I said, okay, but like, guys, this is my face, and you're kind of insulting me. And this one wonderful student I have a relationship gave me one of those expressions that's like, like, yeah, that is your face. So in honor of that student, I will say I will not inflict my donated likeness upon the world, and I'm gonna keep it back. I think we all sell ourselves on social media
Hmm.
endlessly,
Hmm.
but at the end of the day, I don't want another me walking around out there. How
Okay,
about you?
okay, that's fair. That's fair. You put some good thought into this. Whereas I'm like, that's immortality, man. I'll do it. I've always been like, my wife is like, do you want to be cremated or do you want to be like, what's your ultimate plan? Like, what happens? Like, say you get into a car accident, unfortunately, next week. What should I do with
Hmm.
you? And I'm like, you will put me into a tomb. You will put me into a casket and bury me in the ground on the off chance that I might become a zombie. Like, if there's a chance to come back, I want it. So
You're in.
if this is immortality in some way, shape, or form, I'll do it. And if they can even do a thing in the future where they can take my like memories and inject that, because they kind of do that in this
Download it.
movie. That, oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that scene was wild, where the guy's kind of brain dead and still gets like five
Yeah.
seconds left, and he just is like, oh, that's me, I'm dead. A thing that no
Yeah.
one should really have to like recognize and experience, like your own dead body and your conscious. Like, wow, what a scene. That's
Oof.
the whole thing of
Yeah.
going there. Also,
Great
that
idea.
actor was in Willow. um
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
uh so yeah, I would do that. And if my memories can be uploaded into a conscious in that person too, to kind of keep me rolling, so I can have these wonderful takes moving forward, like, do it. I'm all for it.
So I think you're reserving part 2 of this conversation for when Mickey 17 comes out, the new Bong Joon-ho, Robert
Yeah,
Pattinson movie, because I think that's the experience you're looking for, right? The
basically,
like
yeah.
just over. We got to see exactly how it works out in the movie probably before we sign on, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll report back on that once the film finally agrees on a release date, and then says this is the
Yeah.
day we're coming out. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Very good stuff. Very good stuff, Greg. Thank you so much for coming on the show and chatting all things the creator. Where can the folks find you online? And as Oscar season approaches, it seems like every week the long take reviews tackling one of those best picture nominees. So where can they find you there?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, and yes, this is my bread and butter, is talking about random movies, not just Star Wars movies, but different any movie coming out. So, and we did cover The Creator, and now I'm curious to go back and listen to myself and see
Mm,
how much my attitudes changed back when it came out.
good
Um,
retrospective.
but
Yeah.
uh, yeah, yeah, definitely. So, people can find me most places online, primarily Instagram at EyeOnCanon, EyeOnCanon. And also on Letterboxd, where I'm closing in on my full Oscar watch. I got 11 shorts and 2 features. So uh, definitely, I already know my last ticket for the last documentary is February 27th. So I'll finish by
Ooh,
then, but we'll see
in the nick of
how close
time.
I cut it. Yeah, I thought I had a week beyond that, but it's the
Oh
second,
yeah,
so
March
it's
2nd
just
is
a week
early
behind.
this year, I feel like, and it's always been
Yeah,
like March 16th or March 9th in years past, and yeah, March 2nd, that week moved up too. And it's interesting they didn't, I mean, maybe because the Dolby Theater can't be booked.
mm,
It's probably a very like busy theater for things
yeah,
throughout the year.
probably.
They have that date set and they can't move it, but I thought that maybe with like the fires and the changing of the nominee release date, that maybe they would have reflected that as well, to
Pushed
give
it.
people more
Yeah.
time to watch those screeners, because I've heard people don't watch the screeners. um
That's what I've heard as well,
whole
which
different
again,
conversation though. Give those
you
screeners to
you
Greg,
called it
he'll
out
watch them.
exactly. You called it out on Instagram. Give me the portal. I'll log in and do it. But
This guy's going
yeah,
out of his
these
way to find these movies and tubies and all these different
oof.
streaming sites around the world. He's willing to get a VPN to get some of these things. Come on, guys,
Uh,
just send it to him. Just make his life a little easier. He's talking about him on his podcast. Like, let it be.
yeah,
Anywho,
yeah.
well, Greg, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast here and chatting all things creator. And folks, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope if you haven't gotten a chance to go see the creator, go watch it. It's a really good movie, and I think that once you re-listen to this conversation again, you'll have a lot more to engage with on that one. So if you want to continue the conversation, of course, we're available on all the social media platforms: X, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky. Just search for Force Ghost Conversations, and we'll be there in some capacity. And also, we'll be back next week with another episode in the Lucasfilm adjacent galaxy. Yes, we're going back to the Rebel Moon galaxy, and we're finally tackling those Rebel Moon director's cuts. So we'll be talking about director's cut part 1 next week. So be on the lookout for that in your podcast feeds. And until then, may the Force be with you. Take care.